The station master didn't even look up from his logbook when he said it. The man you came to marry is dead. He said it the way a person announces a late train, flat, final, already forgotten before the words finished leaving his mouth. Evelyn Hart stood at the window of Blackridge Station with her 5-year-old son pressed against her leg and $17 folded inside her boot, and she felt the floor shift beneath her like the whole earth had decided to let go of something. It was done holding. She had crossed 2,000 miles for this. She had sold her mother's china. She had said goodbye to the only street she'd ever known. She had told Noah, her boy, her whole reason for breathing, that everything was going to be different now, better, safe. And the station master was still writing in his logbook. If you've ever stood in a place where everything you planned simply ceased to exist, you know exactly what Evelyn felt in that moment. If you've ever had to hold yourself together for a child who is watching your face for permission to fall apart, you know why she didn't cry. Not yet. Not there. Before we go any further, if this is your first time finding this channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to stay broken. Leave a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, leave a like. It helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to that station platform, because what happened next is the part nobody expected. The logbook scratched steadily under the station master's pen. Evelyn's hand found the top of Noah's head without thinking. She pressed her palm flat against his hair, the way she always did when she needed something solid to hold on to. The boy leaned into her thigh and said nothing. He had learned, somewhere between Boston and Colorado, that silence from his mother meant something serious was happening and that questions could wait. "How?" Evelyn said, just the one word. The station master finally looked up. He was a compact man with a gray mustache and the expression of someone who had delivered bad news enough times that it no longer required any particular care. Saloon fight. 2 nights back, Caleb Mercer got into a dispute with a drifter over a card game. Shot once, didn't make it to morning. He was supposed to meet me yesterday. I know, figured you'd come in on the afternoon train. When you didn't show, the train was delayed. There was ice on the tracks outside of... She stopped herself. The explanation had nowhere to go. Caleb Mercer wasn't waiting anywhere to hear it. Is there someone I should speak to? About arrangements? Or he didn't have family here. He had friends. Most of them already cleared out his place. The station master set down his pen and looked at her with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite indifference. You're welcome to wait inside until morning, ma'am, but I'll be locking up at 9. Evelyn looked down at Noah. He was staring at the station master with the total focused attention children reserve for moments they sense are important without fully understanding why. His small leather boots were dusty from the platform. He had a smear of jam on his collar from the lunch they'd shared on the train, and Evelyn had noticed it 3 hours ago and kept meaning to wipe it clean. She had not wiped it clean. She turned away from the window and walked to the wooden bench at the far end of the waiting room and sat down. She set her suitcase between her feet. Noah climbed up beside her without being asked and tucked himself under her arm. "Mama," he said quietly. "Is the man not coming?" "No, sweetheart." "Because he forgot?" Evelyn looked at the door. Outside the single window, Blackridge was settling into its evening business. Horses at hitching posts, yellow light bleeding out of storefronts, a wind moving through that had teeth in it. Colorado in October didn't ask permission before it got cold. "Because something happened to him," she said. Noah thought about this. "Is he sick?" "He passed away, baby." The boy went quiet again. He pressed closer to her side, and she could feel him working through it in whatever way a 5-year-old works through the death of a stranger who was supposed to become a father. After a long moment, he said, "Are we going home?" $17. 1 suitcase. A return ticket that would cost 4 times what she had left. "Not tonight," Evelyn said. She did not let herself calculate what came next. If she started calculating, she would see the numbers clearly, and the numbers would tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. So instead, she sat on that wooden bench in a train station at the edge of the Colorado frontier and focused on keeping her breathing even and her hand steady on her son's shoulder. She had been afraid before. When her first husband left, when the money ran out, when the landlord in Boston started leaving notes under the door. Fear was not unfamiliar to her, but this particular kind, the kind that came from being 1,000 miles from anything you recognized with a child who trusted you completely. This kind had a specific quality to it, heavy and patient, like it knew it had all the time in the world. The door opened at 7:30. She heard the boots before she saw the man. Heavy, unhurried, the walk of someone who expected solid ground and usually found it. He came in from the cold carrying the smell of horses and wood smoke and something else she couldn't immediately name, something that had to do with being outdoors for most of your living days. He was broad through the shoulders and wore his coat like he'd had it a long time, dark hair beneath a hat that had seen worse weather than tonight's. He stopped at the window and spoke briefly with the station master, and she watched the station master nod toward her bench, and the man turned. He had the kind of face that showed you the weather it had been through. Not handsome in any polished way, but settled, like the structure underneath had been tested and had held. He walked toward her without hesitation. "You Evelyn Hart?" "I am." He took off his hat. "Rhett Sullivan. Caleb was my closest friend." He paused, just long enough that she could see it cost him something to say the next part. "I'm sorry about what happened to him. He was a good man." Noah had straightened up from under her arm and was looking at the stranger with undisguised curiosity. Children that age had a particular radar for adults who were actually paying attention to them, and this man was... His eyes had moved to Noah almost immediately. "This your boy?" Rhett asked. "This is Noah." Rhett crouched down to eye level. It was an instinctive thing, she could tell. Not performed, not calculated for her benefit. He just dropped to where the child was. "How old are you, Noah?" 5, Noah said. Then, apparently deciding that more information was appropriate. "I lost a tooth last month." "Which one?" Noah opened his mouth and pointed with his finger to the gap on the bottom left. "Good spot to lose one," Rhett said seriously. "Gets the hard ones out of the way early." Noah considered this with the gravity of a scholar receiving significant new data. Rhett stood back up and looked at Evelyn. He didn't say anything for a moment, just took in the suitcase, the bench, the late hour, the equation of it all. She had the uncomfortable sense of being read accurately by someone she had just met. "You have somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked. "I'm working on it." "You're not spending the night in this station." It wasn't offered as an option. He said it the way people say things when they've already decided. And Evelyn's first instinct was to correct him. She was not someone who needed a stranger making decisions on her behalf. But then Noah shivered slightly beside her, and the wind rattled the station window, and she made herself hear the offer as what it actually was. "My sister May runs a boarding house 2 streets over," Rhett said. "Clean rooms, good heat. She's a decent cook. I'll take you there." "I can pay for one night," Evelyn said, which was true, though it would leave her with less than $15. "She'll sort you out." He reached for her suitcase. She didn't stop him. She wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or practicality or something else, some older instinct that had been watching this man for the last few minutes and had made a calculation of its own. She gathered Noah and followed Rhett Sullivan out into the dark Colorado evening, and the station master locked up behind them without a word. The cold was serious. She tucked Noah close and walked quickly to keep pace with Rhett's longer stride. The town of Blackridge was modest. She could see that even in the dark. A main street with a general store. A saloon whose lights were already bright. A church with a dark steeple. Houses spreading out along dirt roads toward the open land beyond. Nothing like Boston. Nothing like anything she had pictured. Caleb had written to her about Blackridge in careful, hopeful terms. "A young town with room to grow," he'd said. "Good people if you know which ones to trust." He'd described his ranch as small but solid, his savings as modest but sufficient, his intentions as entirely honest. She had reread those letters until she had them nearly memorized, trying to know a man from his handwriting. She would never know him now. May Sullivan's boarding house was a 2-story structure with warm light in the windows and a front porch that someone had recently swept. Rhett knocked once and opened the door without waiting, which told her something about how often he came here. May Sullivan was a woman in her mid-40s with the same dark hair as her brother and the expression of someone who had been managing things for so long that management had become second nature. She took one look at Evelyn and Noah in the doorway, looked at Rhett, and said, "I'll get the corner room ready." "Much appreciated," Rhett said. "It's got a good stove. Boy'll be warm." May was already moving down the hallway. She paused and looked back at Evelyn. You eaten? On the train. I'll bring something up. Evelyn followed May down the hallway, and she could feel the warmth of the house settling around her. Actual, physical warmth from good wood stoves and closed windows and walls thick enough to mean it. Noah reached up and took her hand as they climbed the stairs, and she squeezed his fingers and felt something in her chest loosen, just barely. The corner room was small but clean. A bed wide enough for both of them, a cot against the wall, a stove that May had lit efficiently within minutes. There was a wash basin and a pitcher of water and a window that looked out over the back of the property toward an open field disappearing into the dark. May brought up a tray, bread, cold beef, a jar of preserved peaches, a cup of warm milk for Noah. She set it on the small table and looked at Evelyn with a directness that she was starting to associate with the Sullivan family in general. Rhett told me about Caleb, May said. I knew him some. He was a straight-dealing man. She paused. This is not how you were supposed to arrive. No, Evelyn said. It isn't. Well, May's voice was matter-of-fact in the way of women who have absorbed a great deal of difficulty and kept moving. You're here now. We'll figure out what comes next in the morning. She left without making it into anything more than what it was, a practical statement about a practical situation. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and watched Noah attack the preserved peaches with the total commitment that only children and the very hungry could manage, and she let herself sit in the quiet of the room without thinking about tomorrow. Her money situation was simple and terrible, $15.40. 2 train tickets back to Boston would cost her 3 times that. She knew no one in Colorado except a dead man's sister and a dead man's friend, and both of those connections were thin as paper. She had skills. She could cook, manage accounts, maintain a household, but skills needed to be seen before they were valued, and she was a stranger in a frontier town in the middle of a season that was getting colder by the day. She thought about writing to her sister Clara in Philadelphia. Then she remembered that Clara had 3 children of her own and a husband whose income barely covered their needs, and that any letter asking for money would arrive as a burden rather than a rescue. She thought about writing to the agency in Boston that had arranged the marriage introduction, but she had read their contract carefully enough to know that they took no responsibility for what they termed circumstances beyond their management, which apparently included gunfights in saloons. Noah finished the peaches, drank his milk, and was asleep almost before Evelyn had arranged the blanket around him. She sat in the chair by the stove and looked at her sleeping boy and made herself do what she always did when the situation was genuinely bad. She made a list. What she had? A healthy child, 2 working hands, experience managing a household on very little, the ability to do actual work without complaint, 1 night of warm shelter. What she needed? Income, security, enough time to build something. What she did not have, the luxury of feeling sorry for herself past tonight. She allowed herself exactly that much. The full weight of the day, the delayed train, the station master's flat announcement, the cold platform, the stranger's kindness, the relief of the warm room. She let it settle through her and sit there for a few minutes. She pressed her hands against her knees and breathed. Then she thought, in the morning, I'll ask May if she needs help around the boarding house. It wasn't a plan yet. It was the beginning of the idea of a plan, but it was something to move toward, and moving toward something had always served her better than standing still waiting to be found. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have guessed, sitting in that small room at the edge of the Colorado frontier, was that a man was sitting downstairs in May's kitchen drinking coffee and not going home the way he probably should have. Rhett Sullivan had delivered plenty of bad news in his life. He had buried a wife. He had held a daughter who didn't live long enough to need his help with anything at all. He had lost cattle to floods and horses, to accidents and friends, to all the ways the frontier found to take people from you. He was not unfamiliar with loss, and he did not usually sit around in his sister's kitchen after dark processing the delivery of it. But he sat there tonight. May came in and refilled his cup and looked at him with the patience of someone who had known him since he was 6 years old. She's all right, May said. Tougher than she looks. I know. He had seen that on the bench, the way she'd held herself, the hand steady on the boy's shoulder. You didn't have to come tonight. Caleb asked me. He had, actually. 3 weeks ago, in the easy conversational way of someone who doesn't know they're making their last requests.
If anything happens before she gets here, Rhett, just make sure she's not left standing in the cold. It had been a joke, almost. Neither of them had thought it would mean anything. Well, May said, you've done what Caleb asked.
Rhett turned his coffee cup in his hands. She's got a 5-year-old boy and about enough money to last 2 weeks if she's careful. She'll find work. Maybe. May sat down across from him. Rhett. He looked at her. Go home, she said. Not unkindly. He went. But he didn't go home immediately. He stood on May's porch for a moment in the cold and looked up at the window where the light was still on, where the woman he'd just delivered to a warm room was almost certainly sitting alone with exactly the kind of situation that had no clean solution. He told himself he had done his part. Caleb was gone, and the woman was safe for the night, and that was as far as his responsibility logically extended. He was not in the business of adopting other people's problems. He had enough of his own. He went home. He didn't sleep well. Evelyn woke at dawn with Noah's elbow in her ribs, and a clarity of purpose that she had learned over years of difficulty came most reliably from having exhausted all other options. She washed her face in the basin, dressed, and combed her hair back with the efficiency of a woman who had given up on the idea that appearances would save her and kept them up out of self-respect. She left Noah sleeping and went downstairs. May was already in the kitchen. She had the stove lit and was working on something that smelled like real coffee and biscuits, and she looked up when Evelyn appeared in the doorway and said nothing, just pointed at the chair nearest the stove. Evelyn sat and accepted the coffee and drank half of it before she said anything. Then she said, I need to work. May set down her spoon. What can you do? Anything that needs doing. I managed a boarding house in Boston for 2 years after my first husband left. I can cook, clean, manage accounts, organize a household. I'm not looking for charity. I'll earn my keep and the room for me and Noah and whatever I can put aside on top of it. May looked at her steadily. Then she said, room and board included, $4 a week on top of that. It wasn't a lot. It was enough to start with. Done, Evelyn said. May nodded once and handed her an apron. Breakfast rush starts in about 20 minutes. I've got 6 boarders, and they all want eggs. Evelyn tied the apron and got to work. This was how she had always survived things. Not by waiting for someone to arrive and solve it. Not by retreating to what she knew and staying small. She had always moved forward, even when forward was uncomfortable and the ground was unfamiliar, because the alternative, standing still while the options got smaller around her, was the one thing she had never been able to tolerate. She didn't know, cracking eggs in May Sullivan's kitchen that cold October morning, what the next weeks would bring. She didn't know about the cowboy who would come back to this house more often than he intended to, or the boy who would attach himself to that cowboy with an openness that would unsettle everyone who witnessed it, or the unexpected turn the whole thing would take when a job offer arrived that she hadn't asked for and almost didn't take. She knew the eggs needed to be done before the boarders came down. She focused on the eggs. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, hair going in 3 directions, boots unlaced, wearing the expression of a child who has woken up in an unfamiliar room and taken a moment to decide whether this is a problem. He looked around, located his mother at the stove, and immediately relaxed. There's biscuits, he informed her, climbing onto a kitchen chair. There are, May confirmed from the other side of the room. You can have one when they come out of the oven. Noah looked at May with the measuring attention he gave new adults. She was brisk and direct, which Evelyn had already concluded was either endearing or alarming depending on the person. And apparently Noah found it endearing because he said, very politely, "Thank you, ma'am." May glanced at Evelyn with an expression that said something about the boy, and Evelyn just turned back to the eggs. She had arrived one day too late. She had lost the life she came here for before she ever set foot in it. She was broke and stranded and operating on about 4 hours of sleep in a kitchen she'd never been in before. But the biscuits were almost ready, and the boarders would be down soon, and the work in front of her was concrete and manageable, and that, she had learned long ago, was the only advantage she had ever needed. She just needed to keep moving, and she was very, very good at that. The morning moved quickly. 6 boarders, as May had promised, 2 cattle buyers passing through, a traveling doctor, a young couple who'd arrived the week before looking at land, and a retired school teacher who had, May told her quietly, been at the house so long that she had her own cup hook by the stove. Evelyn served, cleared, refilled, managed the kitchen, and kept half an eye on Noah, who had appointed himself May's assistant and was carrying spoons back and forth between the table and the wash basin with profound seriousness. The retired school teacher, a woman named Harriet Banks with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles, watched Evelyn work through the entire breakfast service and then said, as Evelyn collected her plate, "You're efficient." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "I mean it as a real observation, not a compliment." Harriet Banks considered her. "You arrived last night. You were working this morning before most of us were awake. Either you're running from something or you're running toward something. Which is it?" Evelyn paused with the plate in her hand. "Toward," she said. Harriet Banks nodded once, as if this had confirmed something. "Good, the running from one's burn out." She went back to her coffee. Evelyn took the plates to the wash basin and thought about what the old school teacher had said, and decided she was right, and that she had been right for a long time without knowing the precise words for it. She had always been running towards something, she just hadn't always known exactly what. She still didn't know, but she was moving. And movement, she had come to believe, was what kept the fear from getting its hands all the way around you. The day progressed. Evelyn cleaned rooms, made up beds, helped May with the midday meal, organized the boarding house's chaotic accounting ledger, which she had spotted on the kitchen shelf and could not, once spotted, ignore, and managed Noah's afternoon, which involved a period of exploration in May's back garden that produced several interesting rocks, a dead beetle of some size, and a conversation with a neighbor's cat that Noah reported as highly successful. It was nearly supper when the door opened and Rhett Sullivan came in. I was carrying a sack of something from the general store and he left it on the kitchen table without explaining what it was or who had asked for it, and May took it with the wordless ease of people who have negotiated this kind of exchange for decades. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at Evelyn with the steady, assessing expression she was already beginning to recognize. "How are you settling?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "I'm working for May." Something moved in his face. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he'd expected. "Good." Noah appeared from the hallway. He saw Rhett and stopped completely, the way children stop when they suddenly remember something important. Then he crossed the kitchen directly to the man without any particular hesitation and said, "You were at the station last night." "I was," Rhett said. "You have a ranch?" "I do." "Do you have horses?" "Several." Noah absorbed this. "Mama said we might stay here for a while." "Seems likely," Rhett said. "Are you going to come visit again?" There was a pause. Not a long one, but Evelyn caught it. The moment when the question landed somewhere that wasn't entirely comfortable. She watched Rhett look at the boy with the same settled attention he'd given him at the station, and she watched something in his expression move in a way she didn't fully understand yet. "Probably," he said. Noah accepted this with complete satisfaction and went back to whatever he'd been doing in the hallway. Rhett looked up and found Evelyn watching him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the kitchen was warm and the stove was going, and May was pretending to be very interested in something on the shelf across the room. "He's a direct kid," Rhett said. "He takes after his mother," May said, not turning around. Evelyn went back to setting the supper table and did not look at Rhett Sullivan again for the rest of the evening. But she was aware of him the way you become aware of weather when it's changing, not because it's dramatic, but because something in you recognizes that the air has shifted and things will be different before long. She didn't know what to do with that recognition yet. She set the table. She called Noah in to wash his hands. She helped May serve supper to the boarders, and she ate her own meals standing at the kitchen counter the way she always had when space was limited and other people's comfort came first. She put Noah to bed and sat in the chair by the stove again and looked at the same ceiling she had looked at the night before. She had arrived on this frontier with a broken plan and no backup. One day into her new life, she had shelter, income, work. She could do well, and a child who was already showing signs of recovering faster than she was. It was not what she had imagined. It was not close to what she had planned. But plans, she was beginning to relearn, were only ever the first draft of what actually happened. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind move across the Colorado plain outside the window, carrying all the cold and all the space of a country that had no particular interest in her story but would let her write it anyway. That, she thought, would have to be enough. For now. The second week was harder than the first. Not because anything went dramatically wrong. Nothing collapsed. Nothing caught fire. No new catastrophe arrived on the morning train. It was harder in the quieter way that second weeks always are, when the shock of the thing has worn off enough that you can finally feel the full weight of what you're actually carrying. Evelyn felt it on a Tuesday. She was in May's kitchen before dawn, kneading bread dough with both hands, and she stopped for a moment and looked at her hands on the dough and thought, this is my life now. Not the life she'd packed for. Not the life described in Caleb Mercer's careful, hopeful letters. This. A boarding house kitchen in a frontier town, $4 a week, $11 in her boot, and a 5-year-old boy asleep upstairs who had started talking in his sleep, which he had never done before they left Boston. She pressed her hands back into the dough. She had told herself, on that first morning, that movement was what kept the fear manageable. That was still true. But movement required destination, and the destination she'd had was gone. And what she was doing now, working, saving, staying warm, was less a direction than a way of buying time until a real direction showed itself. She was practical enough to know the difference. Noah was the complication she hadn't accounted for. He was adapting, outwardly. Children that age had a particular talent for absorbing new environments with an efficiency that made adults envious. He knew the boarding house layout now, which stairs creaked, where May kept the good biscuits, which of the boarders would slip him a piece of peppermint if he timed his appearances correctly. The retired schoolteacher Harriet Banks had taken a particular interest in him and spent portions of the afternoon drilling him on letters and numbers, with the cheerful severity of someone who had been teaching children for 40 years and did not intend to stop on account of retirement, but he was dreaming badly. She could hear it through the wall some nights, not crying, not calling out, just sounds, restless, unhappy sounds. And when she went in, he would be half awake and confused, reaching for something that wasn't there. She didn't know how to fix that. She could fix the bread and the accounts and the rooms, but she didn't know how to get inside her son's sleep and give him back the future she'd promised him. She was still thinking about this when May came down and found her staring at the wall with flour on her forearms. "Go sit on the porch," May said. "I'm fine." "You've been kneading that same corner of dough for about 8 minutes. Go get some air." Evelyn went. The porch was cold and the sky was doing something complicated in shades of gray and dark blue, the sun not quite committed to rising yet. She stood against the railing with her arms folded and let the cold air do what cold air does, strip away the small things and leave you with only what's essential. What was essential? Noah. Getting through the winter, building something stable enough to stand on. The rest was detail. She went back in and finished the bread and had breakfast ready before the first boarder came down, and if May noticed the red around her eyes, she didn't mention it, which was exactly the right thing to do. Rhett Sullivan came back on a Thursday. She hadn't been keeping track, hadn't intended to anyway. But she noticed when it was Tuesday, and he hadn't come, and she noticed again on Wednesday, and on Thursday afternoon when she heard his boots on the porch steps. She registered a small, uncomfortable flicker of something she immediately decided to examine later and set aside for now. He came in with a hat full of cold air and a problem. "May," he said, dropping into a kitchen chair. "I've got 4 cowboys coming to the ranch next month for winter work and nowhere to put them. My bunkhouse roof's half gone. You got room?" "I've got 2 rooms. That's not 4 cowboys." "I know." He looked at the coffee pot. May poured him a cup without being asked, and he drank it and looked around the kitchen and located Noah at the table, who was in the middle of a serious drawing project that involved an enormous amount of brown crayon and what appeared to be a horse. "What's that?" Rhett asked. Noah looked up. "A ranch." "Whose ranch?" Noah considered. "Mine." Rhett turned the drawing to look at it from another angle. "You've got too many horses for one ranch. I like horses." "You ever been on one?" Noah went still. "No," he said, with the particular quality of restraint that meant the answer was something he cared about very much, and was trying not to show too obviously. Rhett looked at Evelyn, who was at the counter and had been listening to this entire exchange without appearing to. "I'm taking a couple of horses to the farrier Saturday morning," he said. "He's welcome to come along if you've got no objection." Noah's head came up from the drawing so fast it was nearly audible. Evelyn looked at her son's face, then at Rhett Sullivan's, which was entirely calm and showed no awareness of having just rearranged the entire atmosphere of the room. "I'll think about it," she said. Noah turned back to his drawing with the absolute stillness of a child trying not to do anything that might cause a yes to become a no. Rhett finished his coffee and talked to May about the bunkhouse situation and left after about 40 minutes. And the moment the door closed, Noah looked up from his drawing and said, with perfect composure, "Mama, you should say yes." "I'm aware of what you want," Evelyn said. "He knows horses," Noah said, as if this settled the matter constitutionally. She said yes on Friday. Saturday morning, she walked Noah to the edge of May's property, where Rhett was waiting with 2 horses on lead ropes, a big brown gelding and a smaller gray that Noah immediately pointed to and said, "That one." "Good eye," Rhett said. "She's quieter." He looked at Evelyn. "You ride?" "A little, a long time ago." "It comes back." He glanced at Noah. "You want to sit up here while I lead?" Noah's answer was to hold both arms straight up in the universal child signal for "lift me." And Rhett lifted him without ceremony into the saddle and showed him where to put his hands on the horn and told him to sit up straight, and Noah sat up so straight his spine was nearly a separate entity. Evelyn walked beside the gray horse and watched her son's face. He was radiant. There was no other word for it. The kind of joy that is slightly too big for a face to hold, that keeps trying to break out sideways. He gripped the saddle horn with both hands and looked out over the horse's ears at the morning street of Blackridge, as though he were surveying a kingdom. "You look like you've done this before," Rhett said, walking alongside. "I haven't," Noah said seriously, "but I've been practicing in my head." Rhett glanced at Evelyn. She caught the look, there and gone, and returned to watching the road. The farrier's place was at the edge of town, a large open-fronted workshop with the constant bright clang of ironwork. The man himself was huge, broad, and friendly, the kind of person who spoke mostly in grunts but meant them warmly. He took the horses from Rhett and let Noah watch while he examined the first one's hooves, explaining each step in short, practical sentences that Noah absorbed with the focused attention of a student who has finally found a subject that makes sense. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the workshop and watched her son stand next to a man who knew exactly what he was doing with his hands and listened to him explain it, and she felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't immediately name. Not attraction. Not yet, or if it was buried under too many other things to be identifiable as itself. It was something more specific, the recognition that her son, who had been sleeping badly and drawing too many horses, had found something here that she could not give him. She could give him bread and warmth and safety and her entire self. She could not give him this. The walk back was slower. Noah was between them, having negotiated his way to walking rather than being carried, and he talked almost constantly, to Rhett, mostly, asking questions about the horses and the ranch, and how you got a horse to stop when you wanted it to, and how you knew when a horse was in a bad mood. Rhett answered every question with straight-faced seriousness. "How do you know if a horse is in a bad mood?" "Ears go flat back, tail switches too hard. You watch for it." "What do you do?" "Give it space. Don't crowd something that's telling you to back off." "Does it work?" "Usually. Sometimes you still get bitten." Noah thought about this. "What do you do then?" "Don't make the same mistake twice." Noah looked up at Rhett with the expression of someone receiving wisdom of significant personal application. "Mama says that too," he said. "Except about different things." Rhett glanced at Evelyn over the boy's head. "Smart woman, your mama." "I know," Noah said, with such complete certainty that Evelyn had to look at her boots to cover whatever her face was doing. This is where it started, she would think later. Not with any declaration or decision, not with anything she chose. It started with a small boy walking between them asking questions about horses and taking the answers with both hands. She didn't know what to do with that, so she kept walking. The following week, Evelyn found the ranch account ledger. Not found it the way you find something hidden. May hadn't hidden anything. It was simply that Rhett had left a box of papers on the kitchen table during one of his visits, saying something about needing May to look at a figure he didn't understand, and May had gotten distracted, and Evelyn had glanced at the open page while clearing the table and stopped completely. The numbers were a disaster. Not catastrophically, the ranch wasn't failing, but the ledger was kept in the haphazard way of someone who was good at every aspect of running a cattle operation except for the paperwork side of it.
There were unpaid invoices that had been entered twice. There were amounts owed to Rhett that he had apparently never collected because they weren't tracked clearly enough for him to know to go after them. There were expenses recorded in one column that should have been in another, which made the whole picture look worse than it was.
She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at May. Does he have someone managing his accounts? He manages them himself. With respect to your brother, he should not be managing them himself. May looked at the ledger. You're not wrong. Evelyn closed the box and left it on the table and went back to her work and said nothing more about it. It wasn't her business. She had a job. She had her $4 a week and her room and her son and her own situation to manage without inserting herself into someone else's. She left it alone for 4 days. On the 5th day, she sat down and did the ledger anyway. She took 2 hours in the evening after Noah was asleep and May had retired, with a lamp and a fresh sheet of paper, and she went through the entire thing. She identified what Rhett was actually owed versus what he thought he was owed. She separated the duplicate entries. She reorganized the column structure so that a person looking at it could actually read what it was telling them. She cross-referenced it against the 3 invoices in the box and found that 2 local buyers had been delivered cattle in August and September and had paid less than they owed, the shortage buried in a clerical confusion that Rhett had probably not noticed. The discrepancy was $63. She wrote everything up cleanly, with clear notation, and set it on the kitchen table with a note that said, I went through your ledger. You're owed $63 that isn't recorded correctly. The details are here. She signed it E. Hart and went to bed. In the morning, the papers were gone. Rhett didn't come that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, he appeared in the kitchen in the mid-afternoon with an expression that she couldn't fully read, somewhere between uncomfortable and something else. You did my books, he said. I noticed they needed doing. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. She was chopping vegetables and she kept chopping. You're owed $63 from Hennessy and the Caldwell outfit. The Hennessy shortage is probably a genuine error. The Caldwell one looks more deliberate. The figures were adjusted after the original entry. Silence. Caldwell's been dealing with me for 3 years, Rhett said. I know. The original figures are still legible under the revision. You can see where it was written over. She stopped chopping and looked at him directly. What you do with that is your business. I just thought you should know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface, the gesture of a man recalibrating. What do I owe you for the work? He asked. Nothing. Consider it thanks for Saturday with Noah. That's not an equal trade. It's the trade I'm offering. She went back to the vegetables. The ledger's readable now. If you keep it up the same way going forward, you'll be able to see these problems before they compound. Another silence. Then, you do this in Boston? Accounting? I managed a boarding house. The owner was more interested in the social side of it than the financial side. Someone had to keep track of the money. You always been good with numbers? She thought about that. I've always needed to be. The distinction was not lost on him. She could see that. He stayed for supper that evening. May had made enough for extra, as she generally did, and Rhett sat at the kitchen table and ate with the straightforward appreciation of a man who spent most of his time cooking for himself. And Noah appeared at his elbow midway through the meal and requested that Rhett explain the saddle horn to him more specifically because he had been thinking about it. Rhett set down his fork and explained the saddle horn. Evelyn watched her son sit half in and half out of the chair beside Rhett, completely riveted by information about equipment she had no particular interest in herself, and she ate her own supper and thought about what she was going to do about the situation she was in. Because it was becoming a situation. She could see that. It was one thing to accept help from a man who was acting out of obligation to a dead friend. It was another thing to let your son spend Saturday mornings at the farrier and your evenings reorganizing a man's accounts and your quiet moments wondering what he'd said and why. That was a different thing entirely, and she was not someone who let herself drift into things without knowing she was doing it. She wasn't sure she had a choice about this particular current, but she was watching it. A week later, Rhett made the offer. He came in on a Thursday afternoon. She had quietly given up pretending she wasn't keeping track. And he sat down at the kitchen table and waited until May had found a reason to be somewhere else in the house, which she did with the subtle grace of someone who had been managing situations involving her brother for decades. I have a proposition, he said, a practical one. Evelyn sat down across from him. All right, The ranch needs managing, not the cattle. I can handle the cattle. The house, the accounts, the organization. It's been... He stopped, started again. My wife died 4 years ago. She handled most of that side of it. Since then, it's been getting away from me. Evelyn waited. I'm offering you a proper position, he said. Housekeeper and account manager at Sullivan's Crossing. Wages, $6 a week, real wages, not boarding house rates, and a room for you and Noah in the house. Full room and board included. $6 a week. Full room and board. That was nearly double what she was making at May's. She was quiet for a moment. Why are you offering this? Because you found $63 in my accounts in 2 hours, he said. Because my house is currently a place I eat and sleep, and that's about all it is, and it should be more than that. Because you've got a kid who needs space to run, and the boarding house doesn't give you that. You don't know me, she said. Not really. I know enough. He said it without any particular weight, just a simple statement. I know you showed up in a situation that would have flattened most people and had a job within 24 hours. I know you fixed my ledger without being asked and didn't make a production of it. I know your boy has been teaching himself to whistle for 2 weeks because he thinks I'll be impressed. Something hit her sideways. He told me himself. He said he wanted to have something to show me. Rhett said it matter-of-factly, as if this were ordinary information, as if a 5-year-old practicing to impress him was a thing he received every day and processed without ceremony. She looked at the table surface. The table surface was very interesting suddenly. A 1-month trial, she said. I'll work 1 month, and if it's not working for either of us, I take what I've earned, and we're done. No obligation on either side past the month. Fair, he said immediately. I'll need to see the ranch first, before I commit. I can take you Saturday. I'll arrange care for Noah. Bring him, Rhett said. He can see the horses. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the same settled, even attention he always had, like a man who had located his position and was comfortable in it. She had met very few men who looked at her like that, not trying to convince her of something, not waiting for her to be grateful, just present. Like this was a conversation between equals about a practical matter, and he expected her to make a reasonable decision based on the information provided. Saturday then, she said. Sullivan's Crossing was not what she expected. She had pictured something in keeping with Caleb's description, modest, functional, a working man's property. What she found was significantly larger and significantly more neglected. The land itself was good. She could see that even with no particular ranching knowledge, the way the valley sat, and the way the creek ran, and the way the grazing land opened up beyond the hill. The cattle she saw in the near pasture were healthy. The horses in the corral were well kept. The house was something else. It wasn't ruined. It was simply a house that had not been lived in the full sense of the word, for a long time. Dishes were functional but cheerless. The curtains, what remained of them, had been there long enough to lose most of their color. The kitchen was organized in the way of a man who cooked because he had to and put things away according to a system that made sense only to himself. The main room had good furniture that was slowly being consumed by a layer of accumulated dust and disorganization. Papers here, tack equipment there, books stacked on a window seat in no particular order. But the bones were good. She could see that. The bones were very good. Noah, for his part, had taken one look at the corral and essentially ceased to exist as a companion for the remainder of the visit. Rhett had introduced him to a bay horse named Cooper, who had the temperament of a large patient dog, and Noah had spent an hour learning to brush the horse's flank while Rhett talked him through it, and Evelyn had walked through the house alone with a critical eye and a growing list in her head. She found the neglected kitchen garden behind the house, found the dry goods inventory, which was adequate but poorly organized, found a small office room off the main hallway that had clearly been used at some point as an actual office and had since become a general storage location for everything that didn't have a clear home elsewhere. She found, on the shelf in that office room, a small framed photograph. A woman, younger than Evelyn, with a serious expression and dark hair. Beside her, a little girl, maybe 2 years old. The girl was laughing at something outside the frame, caught mid-motion, blurry at the edges. Evelyn looked at it for a long moment. Then she set it carefully back on the shelf where she'd found it, face forward, and walked out of the room. She understood, looking at that photograph, several things at once. She understood why the house felt like a place someone was surviving rather than living. She understood why Rhett worked his cattle with the dedicated intensity of a man who needed the work to be bigger than the silence around it. She understood why he had looked at Noah with that particular quality of attention, not pity, not performance, but something older and more personal. She didn't say any of this to him. She went and found him at the corral fence, watching Noah and Cooper with his forearms resting on the top rail, and she stood beside him and looked at her son's face, still radiant, still working hard to hide it, and still failing, and said, "I'll take the position." Rhett nodded once. "Good. I'll need the Sunday after next to give May proper notice." "Of course. And I'll reorganize the kitchen first. The rest can wait until the house is in order." "Whatever you need." She started to move away. Then she stopped because there was something she needed to say, and she had always found it better to say the hard things directly than let them sit and rot. "That photograph in the office," she said. "I won't move it." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, not surprised that she'd found it, not upset, just quiet. She went back to the corral and called Noah to come down for lunch, and she did not look back at Rhett Sullivan to see what his face was doing, because some things were private, and she had already learned enough for one day. The move to Sullivan's Crossing took place on a Monday. Evelyn owned very little, which made the logistics simple. One suitcase, one box of Noah's things, the rocks from the garden at May's, the drawings, 3 books, the leather-bound primer that Harriet Banks had pressed into her hands on the last morning, saying gruffly that she had another one and Noah might as well have it. May had packed them a basket of food for the first day, and she had hugged Noah for a long time, and she had hugged Evelyn briefly and said, with her characteristic economy of sentiment, "You'll be fine, you're sensible." Coming from May Sullivan, this was a significant compliment. The first week at the ranch was work, straight through. Evelyn attacked the kitchen first, 2 full days of sorting, scrubbing, reorganizing, and establishing a system that made functional sense. She found canned goods that had been in the cellar long enough that she didn't trust them, and disposed of them. She organized the dry goods by type and quantity, and wrote an inventory on a piece of paper she tacked inside the cellar door. She established a cleaning rotation for the house that she wrote out and stuck to, not because she needed the reminder, but because a written rotation was the difference between a house that maintained itself and one that deteriorated between emergencies. Rhett was largely absent during this first week. He was out with the cattle from before dawn until well past dark, which was ordinary November ranching work, and he came in for meals and ate without complaint and said little. He watched her reorganize his kitchen with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not uncomfortable, not approving, just watching, like a man taking in the weather. Noah followed her through the house during the work, sometimes helping and sometimes simply present. He had decided within the first 2 days that the ranch was the greatest location in his personal history, and he moved through it with the proprietary confidence of someone who has discovered a territory and intends to fully explore it. He found the hayloft and claimed it as a reading spot. He found the creek and watched it for an hour and came back and told Evelyn it had fish in it. He found a gap in the fence at the back of the kitchen garden and blocked it with a rock, and then told Rhett about it at supper with the manner of a man reporting on infrastructure maintenance. Rhett received this report seriously. "Good catch," he said. "I'll fix it properly tomorrow." "I can help," Noah said. "You can hold the tools," Rhett said. "Fair?" "Fair," Noah said with a nod. This was their currency, Evelyn noticed. Direct offers, direct acceptances. Noah had decided, with the unerring instinct of a 5-year-old who had never learned to second-guess himself, that Rhett Sullivan was someone worth paying attention to, and he paid attention with his whole self, without reservation, without the careful self-protection that Evelyn had spent years cultivating. Children didn't know to protect themselves from liking people. They just liked them. She envied him that sometimes. By the end of the first week, the house was in functional order. By the end of the second week, she had turned the kitchen into a place that actually worked. Not comfortable yet, not warm, but organized and purposeful. She had started on the accounts again, working in the evenings, and had found 2 more irregularities and 3 expenses that could be reduced with basic renegotiation. She brought these to Rhett on a Friday evening. He sat across the office table from her. She had cleared the office, organized the shelves, set the photograph of his wife and daughter in its place where he could see it from the desk. And she walked him through her findings with the same directness she used for everything else. He listened. He asked 2 questions, both practical. He accepted her proposed adjustments without argument. Then he said quietly, looking at the papers rather than at her, "You're good at this." "I told you I was." "You told me you'd been good with numbers. That's not the same thing." He looked up. "This is strategy. You're not just counting money, you're thinking about where it goes." She looked at him. There it was again, that quality of attention, like he was actually seeing what he was looking at, not just looking. "Someone has to think about where it goes," she said. "Otherwise it just goes." He almost smiled. "Where did you learn that?" "From not having enough of it," she said. "For long enough." He nodded once, and that was that. He didn't reach for a compliment or a sentiment. He just nodded, like the information had been filed and accepted and would inform how he moved forward. She gathered the papers and left him to the evening. In the hallway, she stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment and did a private inventory of herself. She had been at Sullivan's Crossing for 2 weeks. She had reorganized a kitchen, established a household routine, found and corrected several financial irregularities, coaxed a 5-year-old through the second week of sleeping in a new place, and managed to maintain a professional working arrangement with a man who confused her in ways she didn't have language for yet. She was doing all right. She was also, she admitted to herself in the privacy of that hallway, in some danger of something she hadn't planned for. Not from him. He had been nothing but straightforward. That was in fact the problem. Straightforward was harder to guard against than anything complicated. She pushed herself off the wall and went to check on Noah. I was asleep in his room. His room, a thing he'd said with a particular reverence the first night, my room. As if the concept of having a specific room in a specific house had reorganized something fundamental in his small understanding of how the world worked. His rocks were on the windowsill. His drawings were pinned above the bed. Harriet Banks's primer was on the nightstand, open to the page they'd been working on before supper. He was sleeping with both arms spread wide, the way he always slept when he felt safe. Flung open, defenses down, taking up whatever space the world would give him. She stood in the doorway and looked at her son and felt the specific terror and love of parenthood, which is always both things simultaneously and can never be separated into its parts. He was safe tonight. He had a room and a warm house and a horse to visit in the morning. That was what she'd come west for, not the man she'd come to marry. She understood that now. She had come west because the life she'd had was closing around her like walls, and she needed something to open up. And the frontier was where people went when they needed things to open up. It had opened. In ways she hadn't expected, in directions she hadn't chosen, toward people she hadn't known existed. She pulled Noah's door mostly closed and walked back down the hallway. From the office, she could hear Rhett still at the desk, the quiet sound of papers moving, the occasional creak of the chair. A man working late in his own house, in the way men who live alone learn to work, steadily, without urgency, simply because the alternative is silence. She did not knock on the door. She went to her own room and sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall, and she thought about what she had come west for and what she had found instead. She thought about a photograph on a shelf, and a little girl blurry at the edges, and a man who had not put the picture away. She thought about Noah saying my room. She thought, this is how it starts. You don't decide to let something happen. You just one day realize it already has. She wasn't sure yet whether that was a problem or not. What she knew was that she was no longer spending the night in a train station with $17 and no place to go. She had a room in a house on a working ranch with a child who was sleeping soundly for the first time in 3 weeks. She had useful work and fair wages and a man who looked at her like she was a person with a full interior life rather than a category. It was more than she'd had, whether it was leading somewhere that would hold her weight that she didn't know yet. She would find out. She was still, after all, moving forward. The month trial ended on a Thursday, and neither of them mentioned it. Evelyn had been aware of the date for the last week, had tracked it the way you track something that has weight attached to it, quietly, in the back of your mind while you're doing other things. She had told herself she would bring it up. Ask plainly whether the arrangement was to continue and on what terms. She was not a woman who let important things drift along unaddressed. And then Thursday came and went, and she served supper and reorganized the cellar inventory and helped Noah practice his letters, and Rhett came in from the cattle work and ate and said something about the north pasture fence needing attention before the hard freeze, and neither of them said a single word about the month being up. On Friday morning, she understood this was its own kind of answer. She didn't examine it too closely. She was getting better at that, at accepting certain facts without turning them over and over until she'd worn the surface off them. The ranch needed what she was doing. She needed what the ranch was giving her. That was sufficient for now. What was changing, and what she could not entirely prevent herself from examining, was the texture of the days themselves. In the beginning, Sullivan's Crossing had been work. That was what she'd told herself and what she'd maintained. She arrived in the morning in the practical frame of mind of someone doing a job. And she did the job. And the man of the house was mostly elsewhere doing his own job. And their interactions were functional and bounded. She had liked that. It had felt manageable. Somewhere around the 5th week, it had stopped feeling like work and started feeling like something else. And that was when she became careful. She was careful about what she noticed. She noticed anyway. She noticed that Rhett had started coming in for the midday meal instead of eating in the field, which he hadn't done in the first weeks. She noticed that when he came in, he always found something to say to Noah before he sat down. A question about the horse, a comment about something the boy had done that morning, a continuation of whatever they'd been discussing the previous day, and that Noah stored these conversations like a person stores valuables, taking them out later and examining them when he thought no one was watching. She noticed that the house was warm in a way it hadn't been at the beginning. Not just temperature, though she had fixed the draft under the kitchen door and located the missing damper plate for the main room stove. Something else, the kind of warmth that comes from a place being used for its full purpose. She noticed that Rhett laughed more. Not much. He was not a man given to easy laughter. But it happened now, in small, genuine flashes. Usually when Noah said something, sometimes when she said something. Once when she burned the bottom of a pot of beans so thoroughly that the smell drove all 3 of them out of the kitchen and onto the porch, and she stood there with her ruined pot and said, "Well," and Noah said solemnly, "Mama, I think the beans are dead." And the sound that came out of Rhett Sullivan was sudden and real and briefly transformed his face into something she hadn't seen there before. She had replayed that moment several times without intending to. And she noticed, most dangerously, that Rhett Sullivan looked at her. Not constantly, not obtrusively. But he looked at her the way you look at something you are thinking about, and she knew the difference between that and looking at someone you employ, and she had been pretending not to know the difference for 3 weeks. All of this was the context for what happened on the first Saturday of December. Evelyn had taken Noah into Black Ridge for supplies. It was a practical trip, a list, a budget, the general store, the feed merchant for a small item Rhett had asked her to pick up. She had Noah beside her navigating the boardwalk with the focused energy of a child who has decided that frontier towns are fundamentally interesting and should be investigated thoroughly. They came out of the general store with the flour and the salt and the dried beans she was not going to burn this time, and they nearly walked directly into Vivian Prescott. Evelyn knew the name. May had mentioned it in passing, with the light neutrality people use when they don't want to editorialize but can't quite help themselves. Vivian Prescott, widow of Douglas Prescott, who had owned the second-largest property in the valley before he died of a heart complaint 18 months ago, leaving her well provided for and apparently at a loss for what to do with the energy she'd previously spent on being his wife. The woman in front of her now was not what Evelyn had pictured from May's careful non-description. She was elegant, genuinely so, not just expensively dressed, but with the specific ease of someone who has inhabited elegance long enough that it sits on them naturally. Dark red hair pinned impeccably, good coat, the kind of boots that cost as much as Evelyn made in 3 months. She was also looking at Evelyn with an expression of studied assessment that did not bother to disguise itself as anything else. "You must be the woman from the boarding house," Vivian said. Not unfriendly, not friendly, precise. "Evelyn Hart," Evelyn said, "and this is my son Noah." Vivian glanced at Noah with the brisk acknowledgement of someone who had never found children particularly relevant. Then her attention came back to Evelyn with the full weight of it. "I've heard you're staying at Sullivan's Crossing now," she said. "I manage the house and accounts for Mr. Sullivan, yes." A sound that contained a complete sentence. "And how long have you been managing things?" "About 6 weeks. And before that you were at May's." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "You arrived to marry Caleb Mercer." It was delivered as a statement, not a question, the kind of statement that doesn't need a question mark because it already contains its point. "I arrived to meet Caleb Mercer," Evelyn said. "He was killed before I arrived." "Yes." Something shifted in Vivian's expression. Not sympathy, not quite. Recognition, maybe. So you found yourself in a difficult position, and Rhett came to the rescue. I found myself in a difficult position and made my own arrangements, Evelyn said. The temperature in her voice had dropped a few degrees. Is there something I can help you with, Mrs. Prescott? Vivian smiled. It was a good smile, polished to a smooth finish. I'm just being neighborly. We're all neighbors out here, after all, however we happen to arrive. She let her eyes move to Noah once more and then back. How lovely, traveling alone with a small child. That must have been brave. She made the word brave mean something else entirely. It was practical, Evelyn said. Good day, Mrs. Prescott. She took Noah's hand and they walked. She kept her grip even and her pace normal, and her face arranged in the expression she used when she needed the outside of her to be different from the inside. Noah waited until they were half a block away. Then he said, I didn't like her. Noah. She talked like her mouth was smiling, but her eyes weren't. Evelyn looked down at him, 5 years old. You're very observant, she said. What's observant? It means you notice things. He seemed pleased with this. Was she being mean to you? She was being something, Evelyn said. She didn't tell Rhett about the encounter when she got back. There was nothing to tell, technically. The woman had said nothing outright terrible. She had only implied it, which was a specific skill that Evelyn recognized from her time in Boston, the ability to wound precisely while maintaining perfect deniability. But over the following week, she understood that the encounter had not been contained to a single moment on a boardwalk. Blackridge was small. Small towns had specific mechanics. Information moved like water finding its level, flowing along social channels that were invisible to people who were new to the place. Evelyn had been in Blackridge long enough to see the surface of these mechanics, but not yet to fully understand them. By the middle of December, she was beginning to understand them through their effects. The feed merchant was slightly cooler. The woman at the dry goods counter, who had been warmly curious about Boston in the first weeks, now answered questions with straightforward brevity. 2 women she'd been introduced to at May's boarding house, respectable ranch wives who'd come in for a Sunday meal, looked past her on the street with the casual clarity of people who have made a social decision. None of it was dramatic. All of it was clear. May told her, with her characteristic directness, on a Wednesday afternoon, Vivian Prescott has been talking. I assumed, Evelyn said. She's telling people you arrived here looking for a husband, that you missed one and collected another. May looked at her steadily. She's doing it the careful way. Tea parties and concerns, and I'm sure she's very capable, but that kind of thing. Evelyn set down the pan she'd been drying. What is she saying specifically? That you're a woman who came out here with nothing and a child, and that Rhett is being taken advantage of by someone desperate enough to make herself useful. May paused. She's been interested in Rhett for a while, since Douglas died. And Rhett? Rhett has never been interested in being managed by a woman with opinions about how a ranch should look. May's expression conveyed that this was a generous summary of her brother's position. But she's got land and money and connections in this valley, and some of the men Rhett works with listen to what she says. Evelyn stared at the wall. She did not feel panicked. She had been through too many actual problems to panic about a woman's Tea Party campaign. But she felt the particular cold clarity of someone who has just identified the shape of a real threat. What would you do? She asked May. If I were you? May considered. Nothing yet? She's waiting for you to react. If you leave, she wins. If you fight her directly, she gets to say you're unstable. May looked at her with something that was not quite a smile. You've been doing the right thing. You keep doing the right thing. It was practical advice. Evelyn had always been able to follow practical advice. What she hadn't accounted for was the effect on her own interior. She rode back to the ranch that afternoon through the early December cold, and she sat with what she'd heard the way she sat with things, thoroughly, without flinching. And she found, underneath the practical analysis, something that surprised her. She didn't want to leave. That was the thing. That was what Vivian Prescott's careful campaign had clarified by threatening. Not that she needed to leave. Not that she should stay because leaving would mean losing. She genuinely, simply, did not want to go. She had not expected to feel this about a frontier ranch in Colorado 6 weeks into an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary. She had not expected to feel this about the kitchen she'd reorganized or the cellar she'd inventoried or the accounts she'd turned into something readable. She had not expected to feel it about a house she'd made warm, or a child she watched becoming someone different, more open, more confident, more at ease, than the quiet, guarded boy who had stood at the train station with jam on his collar. And she had not expected to feel it about the man who came in from the cold every evening and sat at the table she'd set and ate the food she'd made and talked to her son, like talking to her son was something he'd needed without knowing it. She did not want to go. She was still wrestling with what to do with that fact when everything shifted. It happened on a Saturday evening, 2 weeks before Christmas, and it started not with Rhett, but with Noah. Noah had been working on something for 3 days. She'd noticed the secrecy of it, the way he disappeared to his room after supper and the careful way he sat on it, literally, when she knocked. And she had the instinct of a good parent that sometimes secrecy is healthy and should be allowed to run its course. On Saturday evening, he presented his project. It was a drawing. More careful than his usual work, he had taken serious time with it. 2 figures standing in front of a house that was recognizably Sullivan's Crossing, rendered in the brown crayon he preferred for architectural subjects. The figures were a woman with yellow hair, which was apparently his interpretation of Evelyn's brown, and a tall figure with a hat. Between them, a smaller figure. He handed it to Rhett. "That's us," Noah said. "Our family." The kitchen went very quiet. Evelyn's hand stopped on the dish she was drying. She watched Rhett hold the drawing and look at it, and she watched something move across his face that she could not fully read. Something complicated and old and very serious, surfacing through the settled expression he normally wore. He looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at Noah. "This is a good drawing," he said. His voice was level, but there was something careful in the way he was being level. "I practiced the house," Noah said. "The roof was hard." "You got the roof right." Noah pointed at the figure with the hat. "That's you. I made your hat bigger than it is, but I ran out of room. I'll try to have a smaller hat next time." Noah took this seriously. "You don't have to. I can just start the drawing in a different place." He took the drawing back, looked at it critically, and then held it back out to Rhett. "You can keep it if you want." Rhett took it. He didn't say anything else, and Noah, satisfied that the transaction was complete, announced that he was going to get a drink of water and disappeared into the hallway. Evelyn did not move. She was still holding the dish. The kitchen had the particular quality of silence that comes after something significant passes through it. Rhett looked up from the drawing. He looked at her. She wasn't sure what he saw in her face. Whatever it was, something settled in his expression, some decision completing itself quietly. "He's a good boy," he said. "I know," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "He's the most straightforward person I've met in years." "He doesn't know to be otherwise yet." Rhett looked back at the drawing. "He drew a family." "He did? How do you feel about that?" It was a direct question. He asked it without edging up to it, without a social approach. Just the question, sitting there in the quiet kitchen. She set down the dish. She turned to face him properly. "Afraid," she said. "Mostly." "Of what specifically?" "Of letting him believe in something that doesn't hold." She kept her voice even. "He lost his father before he understood what having a father meant. He came out here believing he was going to get one and arrived to find out that man was dead. He is 5 years old, and he has a very specific drawing of a family, and he does not know yet how to protect himself from wanting things that might not work out." Rhett was quiet. He was looking at her with that full attention she'd been careful around for weeks, and she held it because looking away felt like a kind of dishonesty she didn't want to practice. "What about what you want?" he said. "I want what's right for my son." "That's not what I asked," she breathed. "I know what you asked. Then answer it." She looked at the kitchen, her kitchen now, in the practical sense of her hands having shaped it, and at the window where the December dark was pressing in and the lantern light made everything small and contained. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the honest answer." Rhett nodded once. He looked at the drawing, then he crossed the kitchen and tacked the drawing to the wall beside the window, in the place where she'd put up the herb drying rack and the small calendar she'd gotten from the general store. He stepped back and looked at it. "It can stay there," he said, "until we know." She didn't know what to say. She said nothing. He got his coat and said goodnight and went out to finish his evening rounds of the stock. And Evelyn stood in the kitchen looking at Noah's drawing tacked to the wall and felt something she had not felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt precisely like something good might actually be possible. She did not trust that feeling. She had learned not to trust feelings that arrived this easily, because easy feelings were often the ones that cost the most when they turned. But she felt it anyway. The following week, Vivian Prescott came to the ranch. She arrived on Tuesday afternoon in a proper carriage with a driver, which told Evelyn something about the nature of the visit before the woman had opened her mouth. You didn't bring a carriage to a neighbor's property for a casual call. You brought it to make a point. Evelyn was in the kitchen when she heard the carriage on the road. She looked out the window, saw the vehicle, and took one breath before going to the door. Vivian was dressed as she had been on the boardwalk, impeccably, deliberately. She stepped down from the carriage with the practiced ease of someone who is aware of being observed and has decided to give the observation something worth looking at. "Mrs. Prescott," Evelyn said, "Rhett's in the north pasture. I can send word if you'd like to wait." "Oh, I know where Rhett is," Vivian said pleasantly. "I'm not here to see Rhett." She looked at Evelyn with a smile that had a floor under it. "I was hoping we could speak, woman to woman." Evelyn stepped back from the door. "Come in." She did not offer tea. She was aware of the calculation in that, the deliberate withholding of the social ritual, and she accepted it. She led Vivian into the main room, which was clean and organized and warm, and she sat in the chair she used for reading and indicated the one across it. Vivian sat and looked around the room. She took her time about it. She noted the curtains Evelyn had repaired, the order of the books on the window seat, the drawing on the kitchen wall visible through the doorway. Her expression was neutral and trained. "You've made quite a difference to this place," she said. "That's the job," Evelyn said. "Yes." Vivian looked at her. "The job. I want to speak to you about that, actually, because I'm concerned." "About what?" "About you." The voice was warm and very precisely calibrated. "You found yourself in a vulnerable position through no fault of your own. Arriving here with a child, with the man you expected to marry already gone. That's a terrible thing. I have genuine sympathy for it." A pause. "But I worry that the situation you've placed yourself in now is complicated." "In what way?" "A woman alone, living in a single man's house, running his home, managing his accounts. People talk, Evelyn. And in a town like this, how people talk it matters. For your reputation. For what your boy grows up into." Vivian tilted her head. "I've lived here for years. I know how this valley works. What's being said about you is—" "I know what's being said," Evelyn said. "I know who's saying it." A slight pause. "Then you understand my concern." "No," Evelyn said. "I understand your objective." Vivian's smile stayed in place. It was a good smile. "I'm trying to help you. You're trying to make me uncomfortable enough to leave." Evelyn kept her voice even. There was no point in being anything other than direct with a woman this precise. "I appreciate that you've done it through concern rather than hostility. It's a more sophisticated approach. But I'm not going to leave." Something moved in Vivian's expression. The smile stayed, but the quality beneath it changed. "You should think very carefully about your position," Vivian said. "Rhett Sullivan is a man with a future in this valley. Property, reputation, connections. The kind of future that requires a particular kind of woman beside him." A pause that had a blade in it. "A woman from here, who understands this territory and what's required of a rancher's wife. Not someone who arrived with a suitcase and a child she can't support, and decided the best option available was to make herself indispensable to a widower who's been alone too long to know the difference." The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Vivian Prescott, at the careful clothes and the practiced smile and the eyes that were measuring for exactly the kind of wound that would take a while to show, and she thought with clarity, "This woman is not wrong that she's a threat. She has money and connections and years in this valley, and she would know exactly how to make Rhett's professional life harder if she decided to." She thought, "And she came here to tell me that. Not because she's worried about me, because she wants me to know the size of what I'm up against." She thought, "I have been up against things this size before." "Thank you for your visit," Evelyn said. She stood up. "I'll tell Rhett you stopped by." Vivian rose. She looked at Evelyn for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, genuine reassessment, the acknowledgement that the approach had not produced the expected result. "You're more stubborn than I expected," she said, not entirely disapprovingly. I'm more stubborn than most people expect, Evelyn said. She showed her out. She watched the carriage turn on the ranch road and move back toward the valley road, and she stood on the porch in the December cold until it was out of sight. Then she went inside and stood in the kitchen and allowed herself to be afraid for approximately 4 minutes, hands on the counter, breathing deliberately, facing the actual size of the problem without flinching from it. Vivian Prescott had land and influence and a clear interest. She had already been working the social channels of Blackridge for 3 weeks. If she escalated, if she moved from Tea Party implications to direct action, to speaking with the men who conducted business with Rhett, to using her position to make his professional relationships difficult, the damage could be real and lasting. The calculation was simple and uncomfortable. Vivian could not directly remove Evelyn, but she could make Evelyn's presence expensive for Rhett. And if Evelyn genuinely cared about this ranch and the man who ran it, and she was done pretending she didn't, then the most logical thing was to remove herself before she became a liability. She thought about this for the 4 minutes, and then she thought, no. Not because she was proud, though she was. Not because she was stubborn, though she was that too. But because something Vivian had said, disguised as a weapon, had actually clarified something she'd been evading for weeks. A woman who can't support her child, who decided the best option was to make herself indispensable. That was not what had happened here. She knew that. She had come to Sullivan's Crossing with her own skills and done actual work and found actual problems and solved them. She had not attached herself to a man because she needed rescuing. She had made herself useful because she was useful. And if she left because a woman with a carriage had told her she was a burden, she would be agreeing with a version of herself that had never been true. She would not agree to that. She would tell Rhett about the visit. She was done deciding what he did and didn't need to know about his own life. He came in at 5:30, cold and smelling of cattle and December air, and she put a cup of coffee on the table and told him plainly, Vivian Prescott was here this afternoon. He stopped in the middle of taking off his coat. He looked at her. She came here? She came to tell me in careful terms that I should consider my position and make a different choice about it. Evelyn sat down across from him. She's been working the town for 3 weeks. You may start noticing it in how some of your contacts behave toward you. Rhett put his coat on the hook and sat down. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and looked at the table surface. She watched him process it, not quickly, but thoroughly. What did you tell her? I told her I wasn't going to leave. He looked up. Good. I need you to understand what it may cost you, she said. She has real influence in this valley. If she decides to make your professional relationships difficult, I've been dealing with Vivian Prescott's ideas about what I should do with my life since Douglas died, Rhett said. His voice was flat and certain. She's made it clear she thinks she'd make a sensible rancher's wife and that the practical merger of our properties would be a good arrangement for everyone. I've made it equally clear that's not something I'm interested in. He looked at her. She's not going to threaten the ranch. She's going to threaten you because she thinks that's the softer target. She may be right about that. She's wrong. He said it without heat, but also without any available argument. She's wrong because you're not a soft target. I've been watching you for 8 weeks and you are the least soft target I've met in a long time. Evelyn looked at him. He was looking back at her, direct, clear, the same full attention she'd been careful around, and she was done being careful about it. What are we doing, Rhett? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I think we're doing what makes sense, he said carefully. I think we've been doing it for a while and calling it something easier. And what is it actually? He turned the coffee cup in his hands. He was not a man who said things before they were finished forming. She knew that about him now, knew the rhythm of his consideration. So she waited. I want you here, he said, not because you're useful, not because Caleb asked me to look out for you, because this house has been... He stopped. Because I forgot what it was like to want to come inside. And then you were here and I remembered. The kitchen was warm. Outside the window, the first real snow of December was beginning to fall, barely visible in the dark. I'm afraid, she said again. Saying it a second time was easier. I'm afraid every day of letting Noah trust this and having it not hold. I'm afraid of caring about something I didn't choose to care about. You think I'm not afraid? I know you are, she said. I found the photograph. He looked at her. Something in his face went very still. Clara and Lily, he said. My wife and my daughter. Lily was 2 years and 4 months when the fever took her. Clara followed 6 weeks after. I don't think she wanted to be here without her. It was the first time he had said their names in front of her. She could see what it cost him. Not much, because he had spent 4 years paying this particular debt down to something manageable, but something. After that, he said, I decided I was done with that particular risk. And now? He looked at Noah's drawing on the kitchen wall, the house with the too big hat figure and the yellow-haired woman and the small figure between them. And now a 5-year-old boy drew me into a picture of a family, he said, and I tacked it to the wall. He looked at her. I think that tells you where I am. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She thought about what she'd told herself on the porch the night of May's warning, that she was running towards something, not from it. She thought about the train station and the $17 and the station master's flat announcement and Noah's question in the dark. Are we going home? She thought about what the answer to that question was now. I'm not going to leave because Vivian Prescott told me to, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm also not ready to... She stopped, looked at the table, started again. I need it to be real. Whatever this becomes, I need it to be because we chose it, not because we were in the same place at the same time and it was convenient. She looked up at him. I won't marry because I need a roof. He looked at her steadily. I know that. Then you know I need time. I have time, he said. The ranch isn't going anywhere. She almost smiled. Almost. That's not romantic. It's not meant to be romantic, he said. It's meant to be true. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn, and I'm not interested in anything you don't fully mean. She breathed. Outside, the snow was coming harder now, visible against the lamplight from the kitchen window. December in Colorado meant weeks of this, white and cold, and the particular kind of quiet that only comes when the world is insulated from itself. She had been cold and quiet for a long time. She didn't have an answer for him tonight. She had something more honest than an answer. She had the beginning of one, which felt like the first solid ground she'd touched in months. Noah appeared in the doorway in his socks, sliding slightly on the floorboards. He looked at both of them with the uncanny perception of a child who has walked into the middle of something important. Is it snowing? He demanded. It is, Rhett said. Can I see? Rhett pushed back from the table and stood. He picked up the lantern from the counter and carried it to the front door, and he opened the door and held the lantern out, and the light caught the falling snow and made it visible, thick, soft, steady, covering everything in the slow, patient way of something that had all winter. Noah pressed himself against the doorframe and looked out with his whole face. It's a lot of snow, he said. It'll be more by morning, Rhett said. Will the horses be cold? The barn's warm. They'll be fine. Can I check on Cooper? Tomorrow, first light. Noah looked at the snow for another long moment. Then he looked at Rhett. Will you come too? Rhett looked down at the boy and then across at Evelyn, who was standing in the kitchen doorway watching them both, and he said, I'll come too. Noah pushed off the doorframe, satisfied, and went back down the hallway to his room, and Rhett closed the door against the cold, and the house was warm and quiet around them. He looked at her across the main room. She looked back at him. She didn't know yet what the exact shape of what they were building looked like. She didn't know how long the careful work of it would take, or what Vivian Prescott would do next, or how the valley would eventually resolve itself on the question of Evelyn Hart. But she knew that when she thought about leaving, when she let herself actually picture walking away from Sullivan's Crossing, from the kitchen she'd made functional, and the accounts she'd made readable, and the house she'd made warm, something in her went absolutely still. The way a door goes still when you've locked it. She was not leaving. Not because she needed to stay. Because she was, carefully and against all her planning, already home. She went back to the kitchen to finish the supper dishes. The snow kept falling. In the main room, she could hear Rhett banking the fire for the night, the patient sound of someone who knows exactly how to make warmth last. She kept her hands in the wash water, and she did not smile where anyone could see her, but she smiled. The snow that had started falling that December night didn't stop for 3 days. By the time it did, Sullivan's Crossing had disappeared under 18 inches of white, and the world had contracted to the distance you could see from the porch before the light gave out, and the 3 people inside the house had settled into the particular closeness that serious weather forces on people who are sharing a space.
The way distance collapses when the outside becomes inhospitable, and all the warmth there is comes from the same four walls. Rhett was out at first light every morning managing the stock. Evelyn kept the fires, kept the food, kept Noah occupied during the hours when going outside was more punishment than adventure. They ate together at the kitchen table 3 times a day and talked about practical things: the cattle, the supply inventory, the north fence, whether the snow would clear before Christmas. And the practical things were sufficient because underneath them something had shifted, and both of them knew it, and neither of them was in a hurry to press it faster than it wanted to go. What Evelyn noticed in those 3 snowbound days was that living in close proximity to Rhett Sullivan, without the structure of work to organize the interaction, revealed things she had not previously seen. He was patient in a way she hadn't fully clocked before. Not the performed patience of someone managing themselves, but the deep constitutional kind that comes from years of working with animals and weather and land, all of which reward patience and punish the lack of it. When Noah asked him the same question 3 times in one evening, he answered it 3 times with the same seriousness. When the stovepipe in the main room developed a rattle that couldn't be fixed until the snow cleared, he simply adjusted where he sat so the sound was less immediate and didn't mention it again. He was also not easy. She had known that, but the snow days confirmed it in texture. He went quiet in ways that were complete and that required nothing from her. She had known men whose silences were demands for attention, whose stillness was actually a performance waiting for an audience. His silences were genuinely his own. He took them to the far chair with a book, or just sat looking at the fire, and he didn't need her to fill them, and she found she didn't want to. She had her own thoughts. She had spent years surrounded by people who couldn't tolerate quiet, and here was a man who wore it like a coat he'd had for years. He read, which surprised her. Not newspapers, though he read those too, but actual books. She had noticed the window seat collection in the first weeks, but assumed they were mostly decorative, the remnants of whoever had last used this house with intention. On the second snow day, she came into the main room and found him deep in something with the focused concentration of a person who had genuinely left the room for somewhere else. And she looked at the spine. Thoreau. She looked at his face. He was fully elsewhere. She went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment and thought, I keep finding out things about this man that I didn't expect. She was beginning to understand, not going to stop. On the 4th day, the snow cleared enough for Blackridge, and Evelyn rode in with Rhett to get supplies they were running short on. Noah came, bundled into everything warm he owned, riding up on Cooper with Rhett's arm steadying him through the drifts because the snow was too deep for a 5-year-old's legs. The town looked different under the snow, quieter, smaller, the usual frontier busyness damped down by the cold. They tied up at the general store and went in, and the warmth inside was immediate and welcome. And the man behind the counter, Aldous Greaves, 50-ish, with a manner that was generally affable, greeted Rhett without warmth. Not coldly, not rudely, simply without the usual ease of a man talking to someone he'd been doing business with for years. Evelyn noted it. She kept her face level and began working through the supply list. It happened again at the feed merchant, and at the post office, where the postmaster handed Rhett his letters with a slight, unmistakable quality of distance. Rhett noticed. She could see that he noticed, a small tightening around his eyes, a particular set to his jaw. He said nothing about it until they were back at the horses loading the supplies, and then he said quietly, so Noah wouldn't hear, "She's been busy." "Yes," Evelyn said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have a meeting with 3 cattlemen next week about a cooperative grazing arrangement on the East Valley land. 2 of them are men Vivian does regular business with. Do you need the arrangement?" "It would help. It's not essential." She looked at the bundles on the horse. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is because of me." "It's because of her," Rhett said. He said it without heat, as a correction of fact. "Don't take responsibility for what someone else is doing." She looked at him. I was already moving to check the saddle straps, and she watched his hands on the leather, the automatic competence of them, the years of knowing what needs doing and doing it without ceremony. And she thought about what it had cost him to say what he'd said in the kitchen 3 nights ago, and what it was going to cost him if Vivian Prescott's campaign found purchase. She thought, I am not going to let this woman take something from him because of me. She didn't know yet exactly what she was going to do about that.
But she was done waiting for the situation to resolve itself. The cattlemen's meeting was on a Thursday. Evelyn didn't ask to attend. It was a professional meeting on professional matters, and she had no established standing in it. But she knew the three men by name from the ranch accounts, and she spent the 2 days before the meeting going through every transaction Sullivan's Crossing had conducted with each of them for the past 3 years. What she found was useful. One of the men, Bill Hartley, whose spread was north of Black Ridge, had been inconsistent in his pricing for shared grazing access. Not fraudulently inconsistent, just loosely accounted, the way things got when handshakes did the work of contracts. He had charged Rhett variable rates for access that should have been fixed, and the variance worked out to about $40 over 18 months that Rhett had overpaid without knowing it. The second man, Frank Odom, who ran cattle along the Eastern Valley, had a water rights arrangement with Sullivan's Crossing that had been verbally agreed and never documented. Verbal agreements in Colorado in 1876 were worth exactly as much as the continued goodwill of the parties involved, and goodwill, Evelyn had recently observed, was a volatile currency. The third, Gus Melville, who Vivian did the most business with, was clean in his accounts with Rhett, which told her his leverage came from elsewhere. She wrote up her findings in clear, organized notes. She put them on the kitchen table the morning of the meeting. Rhett picked them up. He read through them twice. He looked at her. "You've been doing this for 2 days," he said. "I've been doing my job for 2 days," she said. "The meeting matters. The accounts are part of the meeting." He held the notes. "The Hartley overpayment. You don't have to raise it at the meeting, but you should know it's there. If the meeting goes sideways and you need a reason for them to be careful about how they treat you, a man who knows his numbers is harder to push around than one who doesn't." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she'd seen before, the one that came when she'd said something that landed somewhere specific in him. "And the Odom water rights? Get it in writing, today if you can. A verbal arrangement is only as good as the relationship, and relationships are apparently subject to revision." She kept her tone practical. "He won't object to documenting something he considers already settled. And if he does object, that tells you something about how settled it actually is." Rhett folded the notes and put them in his coat pocket. He picked up his hat. He stopped at the kitchen door and turned back. "You know," he said, "I ran this ranch for 4 years without anyone in my corner." "I know," she said. "I'd gotten used to it." "I know that too." He looked at her. "It's different," he said, "having someone in your corner." He went out. She went back to the inventory she'd been working on, and she was careful and deliberate about keeping her face arranged correctly until she heard his horse leave the yard. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat on the surface and let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, the full weight of what she was in the middle of. Then she got up and went back to work. He came back from the meeting at 4 in the afternoon, and she knew from the way he came through the door, not his usual careful quiet, but with a slightly different energy, something resolved in it, that it had gone reasonably well. He sat down and she put coffee in front of him, and he said, "The Hartley numbers helped. He'd calculated it wrong too, in a different direction. He thought I owed him $12. When I showed him the actual record, it came out to me having overpaid by more than 40. He was embarrassed. Men who are embarrassed want to resolve things." "And Odom? We're documenting the water rights agreement next week. He wasn't opposed. He said it was a sensible thing, and he didn't know why it hadn't been done before." Rhett looked at his coffee. Melville was cold. He'll be Vivian's man in any disagreement, but the other two are solid, and the grazing arrangement went through. Evelyn nodded. "Good. You should know—" He stopped. "Hartley asked me directly. About you. About the situation." She kept her face even. "What did he ask?" "He asked if the rumors were accurate. If you'd come out here looking for a situation and latched onto mine." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you found $40 in his accounts in an afternoon, and that in my experience, people who are latching onto situations don't generally spend their evenings saving the other person money." Rhett looked at her. He seemed to think that was a fair point. She looked at the table. "Thank you. I wasn't defending you as a favor, I was stating a fact." "I know. Thank you anyway." The distinction mattered to her, and she could see that he knew it did. Christmas came quietly. Evelyn had never been a woman who required ceremony, and Rhett was a man for whom ceremony was a concept that lived mostly in theory, and Noah was an age where the reality of a wrapped thing being put in his hands was sufficient magic without any additional production. They decorated the main room with pine boughs that Noah cut with a small hatchet under Rhett's supervision, an operation of great seriousness. And Evelyn made a good supper, and May came out from town for the day, and they sat around the table and ate and talked, and there was a fire going, and outside the snow was back, and it was, Evelyn thought, more like Christmas than any she had managed in the last 4 years. May caught her in the kitchen after supper and said, without preamble, "You look different." "From what?" "From when you were at the boarding house." May studied her. "Less like someone making the best of things." Evelyn considered this. "I suppose I am less like someone making the best of things." "Does that scare you?" "Constantly," Evelyn said. May made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Good. The ones it doesn't scare are the ones who aren't paying attention." She went back to the main room, and Evelyn heard her say something to Rhett that made him produce the short, real laugh she had only heard a handful of times. And she stood in the kitchen for a moment and let that sound sit in her chest like something she wanted to keep. Rhett asked her on the 2nd of January. Not in any elaborate way. There was no particular staging to it. They were in the kitchen after supper. Noah had gone to bed early, worn out from a day of helping Rhett mend the section of pasture fence that the snow had finally uncovered and revealed as more broken than expected. And she was at the counter and he was at the table, and he said, without any particular introduction, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that you can say no and nothing between us changes. The job stands. The arrangement stands. I mean that." She turned from the counter. He was looking at her with the steady, direct expression she had come to understand was his version of showing everything. "All right," she said. "I want you to marry me." He said it simply, without decoration. Not because it's practical, though it is. Not because of Noah, though he's part of it. Because I have not wanted anything specific for myself in 4 years. And then you came, and I started wanting things again. And the main thing I want is for you to be here because you chose it. He paused. "I know you said you needed to be real. I'm asking because I believe it is." She looked at him. She thought about the station master not looking up from his logbook. She thought about $17 in her boot and a 5-year-old boy and the specific total terror of standing in a place where everything had just stopped making sense. She thought about what she had believed in that moment, that arriving one day late had cost her everything. And she thought about what was sitting across from her at a kitchen table in the Colorado winter, asking her something she hadn't believed anyone would ever ask her in exactly this way. Not "you need rescuing and I'm available." Not "this makes practical sense for both of us." I started wanting things again, and the main thing I want is you. She had told him she wouldn't marry because she needed a roof. She had meant it. And what she felt right now, looking at this man who answered her son's questions about horses with straight-faced seriousness, and read Thoreau by the fire, and had tacked a child's drawing to his kitchen wall, was not the relief of a woman who needed a roof and had found one. It was something she didn't have a clean word for. Heavier than relief and brighter than certainty, and yes, still frightening, but the frightening kind that means you're about to do something real rather than the kind that means you're about to make a mistake. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. Just for a moment. The barest change in his expression, like a door opening briefly and then composing itself. "Yes?" "Yes," she said again, "with the understanding that I am not going to become a woman who disappears into someone else's life. I'll be your wife, not your appendage." "I know that." "I'll keep the accounts." "I'll keep working." "I know that too." "And Noah is mine," he said, simply, completely. "If he wants to be. That's his choice when he's ready to make it. But as far as I'm concerned, he's already been mine for a while." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in the kitchen. She had made it this far without crying in the kitchen, and she was not going to start now. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They looked at each other across the kitchen, and it was not romantic in any performed sense. No candlelight, no speeches, both of them still in their work clothes, a stack of dirty supper dishes between them. And it was absolutely the realest thing she had experienced in years. Noah found out at breakfast. Evelyn had intended to tell him with some care, to find the right words for a 5-year-old, navigating the information that the arrangement of his world was changing again. She had a whole approach prepared. What actually happened was that Noah came to breakfast, looked at both of them, and said, "Something is different." Rhett looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Rhett. They had the simultaneous experience of realizing that they had both forgotten that Noah had been paying extremely close attention to both of them for months. "We have something to tell you," Evelyn said. Noah put down his fork and gave her his full attention. This was the thing about Noah. When something mattered, he became completely still. No fidgeting, no distraction, just full, serious presence. "Mr. Sullivan and I are going to get married," she said. "He's going to be your—" She hesitated because there were several words available and none of them felt exactly right. Noah looked at Rhett. "Will I call you Pa?" Rhett looked at the boy for a moment. "That's up to you," he said. "You can call me whatever you're ready to call me. There's no hurry." Noah thought about this with the complete seriousness of a person making an actual decision. Then he picked his fork back up and said, "Can I think about it?" "Take as long as you need," Rhett said. Noah returned to his breakfast. Then, after about 45 seconds, "I think I'll call you Pa." "Okay," Rhett said. "Not today," Noah clarified. "I want to practice it first so it sounds right." "That's sensible," Rhett said. Evelyn stood up and took her plate to the counter so they couldn't see her face. The wedding was announced, which meant, in Blackridge's terms, that Rhett told 2 people he trusted, and by the next morning everyone knew. The reaction was what it was, warm from some, reserved from others, and from Vivian Prescott, a careful, composed silence that was somehow more pointed than any response would have been. She sent a note. Evelyn read it and showed it to Rhett. It was formally correct and utterly empty. Congratulations that contained not a single warm word, precision crafted to be unreproachable while communicating exactly nothing genuine. Rhett read it and put it in the stove. "She'll be fine," May said when they told her. "She'll find someone else to have opinions about." She hugged Evelyn with the brief, fierce efficiency of a woman who doesn't hug often but means it fully when she does. "You're better for him than anything he could have chosen for himself."
"I don't know about that," Evelyn said. "I do," May said. "He couldn't have chosen someone he'd respect. He'd have picked someone manageable and been bored in 6 months. She stepped back and looked at Evelyn. "You're not manageable." "I've been told that before. Not usually as a compliment. Out here it is." The wedding was set for the 3rd week of January, not because there was urgency, but because winter was a long stretch, and doing the paperwork quickly was the practical thing. And they were both people who recognized the practical thing when they saw it. They asked the circuit judge who came through Blackridge every few weeks, a man named Delaney, who had married a dozen frontier couples and conducted the ceremony with warm brevity that suited the occasion. Evelyn made her own dress. Not from scratch, she didn't have the materials or the time, but she had a good dress she'd packed in Boston that she'd been saving for some occasion she hadn't specified yet, dark blue wool with simple lines, and she let it out slightly at the waist, and added a collar she made from a piece of cream-colored fabric she bought from the general store. It was not a bridal dress by any standard. It was a good dress worn by a woman who had decided something. May did her hair. Noah wore his best shirt and informed them both, with the gravity of a man taking on professional obligations, that he would be carrying the rings, a role he performed with such concentrated seriousness that Judge Delaney had to look at the floor for a moment. May and 2 of Rhett's ranch hands stood witness. Harriet Banks came out from town because she had decided to, and no one had suggested she shouldn't. The ceremony took place in the main room of Sullivan's Crossing with the good furniture pushed back and the fire going, and it was small and unremarkable in every external sense. What Evelyn remembered afterward was not the words, though they were said and meant, but the moment just before, when she came in from the hallway where she'd been composing herself and found Rhett already standing by the fireplace, and he turned when he heard her and looked at her across the room with an expression so simple and so direct that she stopped walking for half a second. Not performing, not managing himself, just present, entirely there, entirely for this. She walked the rest of the way across the room. Noah stood beside Rhett and held the rings with both hands cupped together as if he were carrying water. And when the moment came, he presented them with the solemn care of a boy who had practiced this. She was Evelyn Sullivan before the fire had burned down an hour. The town's adjustment was gradual and imperfect, which was how adjustments generally went. Vivian Prescott did not vanish. She maintained her presence in the valley's social fabric, and her careful, formal distance from Evelyn
and they occasionally encountered each other in town with the polished civility of two people who have decided that the battle is over and the terms of coexistence have been established. Evelyn could work with that. She had never needed Vivian's approval. She had only needed to outlast her campaign, which she had done. What she found harder to navigate was the specific arithmetic of being a woman in a frontier town who was also a working partner in a ranch operation, which was not quite the role anyone had a template for. She was not the kind of wife who stayed home and managed the domestic space. She did that, but it was one component of what she did, not the whole of it. She sat in on meetings with buyers. She renegotiated the terms of 2 supply contracts that had been running against Rhett's favor for years. She sent letters on behalf of Sullivan's Crossing that carried her analysis of the cattle markets they were working with, and the responses came back with the particular quality of men addressing someone they've realized is actually the one running the numbers. Some of the Valley men found this confusing. Rhett seemed to find it straightforward. "You're my partner," he said once, when she apologized for what might have been an overreach. She had written directly to a Denver buyer without running it past him first. "Not my assistant. Partners make decisions. If you make one I disagree with, I'll tell you. And if I disagree with yours, you'll tell me." He said it as if this were obvious. Maybe to him it was. She was still adjusting to that, a man who actually meant it. March came. The snow retreated from the valley floor, though it held in the higher ground. The cattle that had been through the winter were lean but surviving, and the spring work began its particular demanding rhythm. It was in March that Caleb Mercer's ranch came up for sale. Evelyn found out from May, who heard it from Aldous Greaves at the general store. The property had been in the hands of Caleb's eastern relatives since his death. They had attempted to manage it remotely through a foreman who had, by March, given notice and left, and the relatives had finally decided that maintaining a Colorado cattle ranch from Philadelphia was not a practical ambition. The asking price was listed with the land agent in Blackridge. Evelyn walked to the land agent the next morning. She stood in his office and looked at the listing and the map and the numbers for approximately 10 minutes. Then she walked back to Sullivan's Crossing and waited for Rhett to come in from the east pasture. He came in at noon. She was at the kitchen table with a piece of paper. She pushed it across to him. He sat down and looked at it. He looked up at her. "Caleb's land. It borders our eastern line. The water rights on that creek belong to that property. If someone else buys it, we lose the buffer on the east side and potentially have water conflicts every dry season for as long as we're here." She kept her voice even and factual. "The asking price is fair for what it is. I've run the numbers." He looked at the paper. He looked at what she'd written. The projections, the land value assessment, the 5-year cash flow estimate showing what the combined property could generate in a good year and what it could sustain in a bad one. "This would take everything we have," he said, "and then some. We'd need to carry debt through the first year at minimum." "I know. If we have one bad season, bad weather, cattle disease, a drop in market prices, we're in serious trouble." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You want to do it." "I think we should do it," she said. "Those are different things. I'm telling you what I think. The decision is yours as much as mine." He looked at the numbers again. He was quiet for a long time, his particular thinking silence, which she had learned to respect without filling. She waited. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we're not buying Caleb's ranch." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not buying the place you were supposed to end up in when you got off that train." He looked at her directly. "We're buying land for Sullivan's Crossing, for what we're building. It's not about where you were going. It's about where we're going. I need to know you see it that way." She looked at him. She understood what he was asking, whether this was about Caleb, about the life that had been promised and then retracted, about completing something that had been interrupted. "It's not about Caleb," she said. "I never met Caleb. I don't owe him anything, and he doesn't owe me anything anymore." She held his gaze. "It's about water rights and a buffer on the east line and 500 acres of good grazing land that shares a boundary with ours and will make this operation stronger for the next 20 years. She paused. "And yes, partly it's about the fact that I came 3 weeks after burying myself in a life that was falling apart around me, and I'd like to build something that lasts, something real and durable that I helped construct from the ground up." She looked at the paper. "That's what it's about." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "How much debt?" "First year, around $300 if we're careful. I've talked to the bank." He raised an eyebrow. I went to the bank this morning before I came to you. I wanted to know what we were actually dealing with, not what I assumed we were dealing with. He looked at her. You went to the bank before you talked to me. I knew what you'd ask, and I wanted to have the answer, she said. I probably should have talked to you first. Probably, he said. But he was almost smiling. $300. Yes. At the rate we're running the accounts now, we can carry it without difficulty if the season is reasonable. If it's bad, she met his eyes. We'll manage. We've both managed things that looked unmanageable before. He turned the paper over in his hands. He thought for a while. Outside, the March sun was doing its tentative work on the remaining snow, and the creek she could hear from the kitchen was running with snowmelt, the particular sound of the season turning. All right, he said. Make the offer. She made the offer the following morning. There was a counter. She countered back. The land agent looked at her across his desk with the specific expression of a man who has realized he is negotiating with someone who has read the numbers more carefully than he has. And she held her position with the quiet certainty of a woman who knows what something is worth and is not interested in paying more. They agreed on a price on a Wednesday. The paperwork was signed the following week with the circuit judge present as notary, and Evelyn walked out of the land agent's office into the thin March sunshine with a copy of the deed in her hand and stood on the boardwalk for a moment and looked at the street of Blackridge and thought about a train station and a wooden bench and $17. She had arrived intending to become part of someone else's life. She had built her own instead. Rhett was waiting at the horses. He looked at her face when she came out, and he read what was in it without asking. Done? He said. Done, she said. He took the horse's reins and handed her hers, and they rode back to the ranch side by side through the March afternoon, and she watched the land they were riding through, their land, the eastern boundary of it, the creek running clear with melt. And she thought about what the next year would look like. The work of combining two properties, establishing new fencing lines, managing two sets of cattle on expanded grazing, the debt to carry, and the careful accounting that would make it possible. She thought about Vivian Prescott watching from her property on the other side of the valley, recalculating. She thought about Noah, who had taken to calling Rhett Pa with the natural ease of someone who had practiced it privately until it felt like a word he'd always known. She thought about this photograph on the shelf in the office. Clara and Lily, still there, still exactly where she'd found it, and the way Rhett sometimes paused in the hallway outside that room, and how she had learned to let those moments be private. Nothing here was perfect. She had not arrived at something finished and clean. What she had arrived at was the ongoing work of a life that had more substance to it than the one she'd been living, and more risk, and more of everything, including the fear she'd decided not to let run her decisions. They came over the last rise, and Sullivan's Crossing was below them. The house, the barn, the new fence along the south pasture, the smoke from the kitchen stove going, because May had come out to sit with Noah while they were in town, and had apparently decided that supper should happen while she was there. Noah appeared on the porch when he heard the horses. He shielded his eyes against the afternoon light and spotted them and waved with his whole arm. Rhett raised a hand back. Evelyn watched her son on the porch of the house, her house, their house, and she thought about the woman who had sat on a wooden bench in a cold train station and believed that arriving one day late had ended her story before it started. She had been wrong about that. She had been so completely, entirely wrong. The horses picked up their pace toward home, and the creek ran alongside them in the thin March sunshine. And from the porch, Noah was already calling something about supper being ready and whatever it was May had made, and Evelyn rode toward all of it without breaking, without hesitating, without any of the careful self-protection she had spent years perfecting. Some things you had to ride toward with your whole self. This was one of them. The first summer on the combined property was the hardest work Evelyn had ever done in her life, and she had done a considerable amount of hard work. The 500 acres they had bought from Caleb's estate did not transition smoothly into Sullivan's Crossing operation. The foreman who had left in March had not been negligent exactly, but he had been indifferent, the particular indifference of a man working land he has no stake in, doing the minimum required to say he had done it. The fencing on the eastern boundary was in worse condition than the survey had suggested. The creek crossing that should have provided reliable cattle access to the lower grazing land had silted badly over the winter and needed clearing. The outbuildings on the former Mercer property were functional, but had been organized according to a logic that bore no relationship to how Sullivan's Crossing actually operated, and integrating them required decisions about what to keep, what to move, and what to simply tear down and rebuild in a better location. Rhett handled the land and cattle side of it. He was up before light every morning and back after dark most evenings, and Evelyn watched him work with the focused intensity of a man who has been given a problem he knows exactly how to solve if he can just get enough hours in the day. He lost weight through the summer. He came in at night with the specific exhaustion of physical work that has pushed past what was comfortable and is now simply what is required, and he ate and said little and slept hard. Evelyn handled everything else. The accounts, always. The house, the supply management across 2 properties. The coordination of the 2 ranch hands they'd hired in April with the 2 they already had, 4 men with different work habits and different histories, and the ordinary frictions of people who are new to each other and figure things out through occasional conflict before settling into something functional. She managed those frictions with the pragmatic diplomacy of a woman who had run a boarding house and understood that the goal was not harmony, but productive cooperation, which was a different thing. She also discovered, in June, that she was pregnant. She sat with this knowledge for 2 days before she told Rhett, not because she was uncertain about telling him. She was not a woman who kept important information from her partner, but because she needed the 2 days to get the fear under control enough that when she told him, she would be able to do it without the fear being the main thing in the room. The fear was specific and had a shape to it. She had seen Rhett's face when he talked about Clara and Lily. She had watched him carry that loss for 4 years, the way he'd organized his entire life around not wanting anything that could be taken from him again. They had built something together, carefully and with a great deal of mutual honesty, and the thing she was about to tell him had the potential to crack it open in ways she couldn't predict. She told him on a Wednesday evening. Noah was asleep. She waited until Rhett had eaten and the worst of the day's exhaustion had settled into something manageable, and she sat across from him at the kitchen table and said it plainly. He went very still. Not a frightened stillness, or not only that, something more complex. She watched it move through him the way weather moves through a landscape, changing the quality of the light as it goes. "Are you certain?" he said. "Yes." He looked at his hands on the table. She let him have the silence because she understood what was in it. Not reluctance, not anything close to reluctance, but the specific terror of a man who has loved a child and lost her and now finds himself on the edge of loving another one, with full knowledge of everything that can go wrong. "Rhett," she said. He looked up. "I know what you're thinking about," she said, "and I'm not going to tell you not to think about it, but I need you to also think about this." She put her hand flat on the table between them. "We are not going to let what happened before steal what's in front of us. That's not something I'm willing to accept, and I don't believe you are either." He looked at her hand on the table. He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I'm not." "Then we're scared together," she said. "But we're doing it anyway." He reached out and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything else, and he didn't need to. What followed was the specific experience of carrying something precious through uncertain terrain, the way you become more careful about everything, more attentive, more aware of all the ways the world is indifferent to what you hope for. Rhett became quieter as the summer progressed, which she understood was not distance but vigilance, the watchfulness of a man trying to protect something he was afraid to fully claim. He brought her water before she asked for it. He noticed when she was tired before she said so. He did these things without announcement, without the performance of concern, simply and practically, as he did everything. Noah noticed that something was happening before they told him. He was 6 now, had turned 6 in July, which they had marked with a cake May had made, and a new book from Harriet Banks, and a writing lesson from Rhett that had graduated to Noah. Sitting Cooper unassisted in the paddock for 20 full minutes, a personal triumph that he reported to every person he encountered for the following week. He had grown in all directions over the past year, taller, louder, more confident in his own presence. He called Rhett Pa without thinking about it anymore. He called May Aunt May. He had opinions about cattle operations that were, Rhett told Evelyn with a straight face, occasionally correct. He came to Evelyn on a Thursday morning in August and said, with his characteristic directness, "Are we getting a baby?" She looked at him. "What makes you ask that?" "Pa keeps bringing you water, and you're sleeping more." He thought about this. And you look at your stomach sometimes when you don't know I'm watching. She sat down so she was at his level. Yes, she said, we're going to have a baby. In the winter, we think. He processed this with the focused seriousness he brought to information of genuine personal relevance. A brother or a sister? We don't know yet. I want a sister, he said immediately. You might get a brother. A brother is fine too, he said, with the magnanimity of a person making a concession. Then, will it change things? With us? She understood what he was asking, the 6-year-old version of a question that was actually quite profound. Will there still be room for me when this other person arrives? Nothing that matters changes, she said. You were my first. That doesn't become less true. He thought about this. Does Pa know? Pa knows. Is he happy? She paused. Happy was not quite the right word for what Rhett was. And Noah, for all his 6-year-old directness, had a good enough radar to notice if she said something that didn't quite fit the truth. He's a lot of things, she said. Happy is one of them. Noah nodded. This seemed to satisfy him. He went back to whatever he'd been doing, and Evelyn stayed sitting for a moment and thought about what it was to be a mother to this specific child. This child who asked the right questions and waited for real answers, and had, over the past year, grown into someone she recognized as both entirely himself and the best version of the person she'd hoped he might become. She had not done that alone. That was the thing she sat with. The summer moved through its relentless demands and gave way, eventually, to a September that smelled like turned earth and cooling grass, and the first suggestion of the coming cold. The expanded ranch was finding its rhythm. The eastern pasture was productive. The creek crossing had been cleared and reinforced. The fencing was complete. The 4 ranch hands had settled into a working arrangement that was not warm exactly, but was solid, which was what mattered. The account showed for the first time the shape of something genuinely sustainable. Not comfortable. They were still carrying the debt from the land purchase, and it would take another full year to clear it at the rate they were running. But the projections Evelyn had written in March were holding. The combined operation was generating what she had said it could generate, and the Denver buyer she had written to directly in the spring had become a regular contact who paid fair prices and paid them promptly, which was more than could be said for 2 of the buyers Rhett had been dealing with before. In October, a letter arrived from Bill Hartley. He was writing to ask, with some formality, whether Evelyn would be willing to look at his operations accounts. His own bookkeeping was, he admitted in the letter's 3rd paragraph, not up to the standard he wished it were, and the work she'd done on the Sullivan ledgers had become something of a known quantity in the valley. He was offering a fee for the service. She read the letter twice. Then she showed it to Rhett. He read it and looked at her. What do you want to do? I want to say yes, she said. But it's additional time. I want to know what you think. I think, he said, that you found $63 in my accounts in 2 hours, and I've been waiting ever since for someone else to figure out what I already knew. He handed the letter back. Write him back. She wrote Hartley back that evening. By the end of October, she had also received a similar inquiry from Frank Odom, who had apparently been talking to Hartley. By the end of November, she was managing accounts for 3 ranches besides their own, Sullivan's Crossing, Hartley's Spread, and Odom's, with a 4th inquiry pending from a cattle operation on the north side of the valley whose owner had heard about her from Odom. She realized one evening while working through Hartley's ledger at the kitchen table, no longer managing accounts as part of being a rancher's wife. She was in a form the frontier had not quite named yet, running a business. She told Rhett this, and he looked at her and said, I know. I've known for 2 months. And? And it's yours, he said. You built it. What do you need from me? She looked at him across the kitchen, this man she had not planned on, in this house she had not planned on, in this life that bore no resemblance to the one she'd been heading toward when she stepped off that train. And she felt again the thing she still didn't have a clean word for. Heavier than gratitude. Steadier than love, though it was that too. Nothing right now, she said. Just keep doing what you're doing. He went back to his book. She went back to the ledger. The baby came on a December night, 14 months after Evelyn had arrived at Blackridge Station with a suitcase and $17. It was not an easy birth. She had known it wouldn't be. She had not had an easy birth with Noah either, and this pregnancy had been harder on her body. May had come out to the ranch 3 days before the due date and settled in the guest room with the calm competence of a woman who had attended several births and did not believe in unnecessary alarm. The local doctor, a man named Prentice, who had set up practice in Blackridge the previous spring, arrived on the second day when it became clear that the timing was going to require patience. Rhett sat in the kitchen for most of it. He did not pace. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface, and he was very still. And Evelyn, in the moments between the worst of it when she had the capacity to think about anything other than the immediate, knew he was sitting in that kitchen with everything he was afraid of and was not letting it move him. She did not have space to carry that for him. She had enough to carry, but she knew it was there, and it mattered. Noah slept through the early part of the night. He appeared in the kitchen at about 2 a.m, drawn by some child's instinct that something important was happening, and found Rhett at the table and sat down across from him without saying anything. Rhett looked at the boy. Noah looked back. After a while, Noah said,
"Is Mama okay?" "Yes," Rhett said. He said it with the certainty of a decision rather than a fact, the way you say things that you need to be true badly enough that you will them toward true with the word itself. Noah accepted this and stayed at the table. They sat together through the small hours of the December night. A man and a 6-year-old boy, both of them waiting, both of them doing the thing that people who are not in control of a situation are required to do, which is simply stay present in it without running. Lillian Rose Sullivan arrived at 4:15 in the morning. She announced herself with the specific vigor of someone who has been confined and has opinions about this. Dr. Prentice emerged from the bedroom and told Rhett, who rose from the table so fast the chair scraped the floor. The doctor held up a hand. "Evelyn is fine. Tired, but fine. The baby is healthy." Rhett stood in the kitchen doorway and breathed. Noah said from the table, "Is it a sister?" "It's a girl," the doctor said. Noah said with quiet, total satisfaction, "I knew it." They let Rhett in first. Evelyn was sitting up in the bed with the baby against her chest, and she looked up when Rhett came in, and there was the exhaustion of a woman who has been through something genuinely hard and also something else, a specific, luminous quality that had nothing to do with how difficult the last several hours had been. Rhett crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter. Evelyn watched his face. She had been watching his face for over a year now, and she knew it well, its usual stillness, the way things moved through it slowly and showed themselves briefly before being folded back. What she saw now was different. She had not seen this before. It was not the careful, contained emotion of a man managing himself. It was the thing underneath that, the thing he'd been managing, old and wide and terrifying in its depth. He reached out one hand and touched the baby's face with one finger, very carefully. "Lillian," Evelyn said quietly. Lillian rose. He looked up at her. "For the past," she said, "and for now." He understood what she meant. She had not asked him. She had simply known. She had known the way you know things about people when you have paid close attention to them for long enough, when you have chosen to really see them rather than just the surface they present. Clara had been a rose gardener. May had told her this, once, in passing, that Clara had planted roses along the south fence at Sullivan's Crossing in the first year of the marriage, and that they had been, in Rhett's terrible private accounting of what the grief had cost him, one of the things he could not bring himself to touch for years. The roses were still growing along that south fence. Evelyn had tended them through the summer. Rhett did not say anything. He looked at the baby, and his eyes were wet, and he did not try to prevent that or perform around it. And Evelyn thought, this is what it looks like when someone decides to love something again after they thought they were done. It looked like being afraid and doing it anyway. It looked like a man sitting on the edge of a bed touching his daughter's face. Noah came in eventually, escorted by May, who had decided sufficient time had passed. He approached the bed with the solemnity of someone assuming a formal role, climbed up carefully on the near side, and looked at the baby with the concentrated attention he gave things of genuine importance. "She's very small," he said. "You were very small once," Evelyn said. He appeared doubtful about this. "Her eyes are closed. She's sleeping. She was just yelling." "She was," May agreed from the doorway. Noah looked at the baby for a long time. Then he looked at Rhett. "She really mine too?" Rhett looked at the boy. This boy who had sat with him in a kitchen at 2 a.m. without asking to leave, who practiced whistling because he wanted to have something to show him, who had drawn a family in brown crayon and handed it over with complete confidence that it would be received as true. "She's really yours too," he said. Noah nodded. This was filed, accepted, settled. He looked back at the baby. "I'm going to teach her things," he said. "What kind of things?" Evelyn asked. "Important things." He thought about it. How to brush a horse. How to find the right rocks. How to whistle. He glanced at Rhett. "Pa taught me to whistle." "I know," Evelyn said. "I want to teach her," he said. "That's what big brothers do." May made a sound in the doorway that she covered by moving away down the hall.
Evelyn did not look at Rhett because she was not going to cry in front of Noah if she could avoid it, on the grounds that he would want an explanation, and she did not have words for this particular feeling. She was not always good with words. She was better with numbers, with actions, with the practical evidence of what things actually were rather than what they claimed to be. She had built her case for this life not through speeches or sentiment, but through showing up and doing the work, and staying when staying was hard. But sitting here now, exhausted, sore, holding her daughter, with her son beside her and her husband on the edge of the bed, and the December dark outside and a house that was warm and full of people who meant something, she understood that there were things numbers could not hold, and this was one of them. This was simply what it felt like to have built something true. The winter settled around Sullivan's Crossing with the patient thoroughness of Colorado winters, and life inside the house organized itself around the new arrival, the way life always reorganizes around babies, with the sleep-deprived, slightly chaotic logic of people who are managing more than they'd managed before and discovering that they can, mostly, handle it. Lillian Rose was not a peaceful baby. This was, May said, entirely in keeping with the established character of her family. She had opinions. She communicated them at volume. She slept in fragments and woke at intervals that suggested she had either no interest in patterns or a very particular pattern designed specifically to prevent other people from adjusting to it. Rhett, who had never seemed like a man who would be comfortable with the specific unpredictability of an infant, turned out to be very comfortable with it. He got up at night without being asked. He learned quickly what each kind of crying meant. He held Lily. The name had simplified itself within the first 2 weeks, though no one could remember who had started it, with the settled competence he brought to everything physical, and the baby, for her part, seemed to find him entirely acceptable, which Noah reported as significant because she wasn't equally accepting of everyone. He was right about that. Lily was selective with her approval and lavish with her disapproval, and the people she approved of were Evelyn, Rhett, and Noah. And after that, May on the day she came, and she treated everyone else with the polite suspicion of a person who has assessed the situation and found the existing arrangement sufficient. Noah was exactly the kind of big brother he had said he would be. He was present, engaged, and surprisingly gentle for a child who conducted most of his own life at full speed. He narrated things to her, what was happening, what things were called, what he thought about them, with the patient thoroughness of a teacher who believes strongly in thorough groundwork. He was 6. She was weeks old. He explained the ranch accounts to her once, sitting beside her on the kitchen floor, while Evelyn worked nearby, with enough clarity and organizational logic that Evelyn genuinely thought, he has been paying attention. Spring came late that year. It came with the particular stubbornness of Colorado springs that have not decided yet whether they intend to commit, alternating warmth and cold through April, in a way that kept the cattle work complicated and the temperament of everyone who worked outdoors slightly frayed. It was during one of the cold snaps in late April that Vivian Prescott appeared again, not at the ranch this time, at the general store in Black Ridge, where Evelyn had come for supplies with Lily in the carrier against her chest, and Noah examining something in the hardware section with focused interest. Vivian came in from the cold and stopped when she saw Evelyn at the counter. A pause. Fractional, but there. Then she crossed the store and stopped a reasonable distance away and looked at the baby. Her expression was something Evelyn had not seen on her face before. Not the practiced warmth or the precise calculation she associated with Vivian. Something quieter. "She's healthy," Vivian said. "She is," Evelyn said. A silence. Vivian looked at the baby for another moment. "Douglas and I tried for children," she said. It came out without its usual careful finish, the sentence of someone saying a thing rather than managing a thing. We never had any. Evelyn looked at her. She did not know what to do with this information. It was real and undefended in a way that Vivian's previous utterances had never been, and it changed the shape of the woman slightly. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Vivian looked at her. Something moved through her expression, acknowledgement, maybe, of the sincerity. "You've made something here," she said. "Not generously exactly, but honestly. More than I expected when you arrived." "More than I expected too," Evelyn said. Another silence. Then Vivian nodded once and moved to conduct whatever business she had come in for, and Evelyn turned back to the counter and did not make more of it than it was. It was not a reconciliation. It was not the closing of a wound. It was two women in a general store in a frontier town having a 30-second conversation that was honest, which was more than they had managed before and was, in the territory of human difficulty, sufficient progress. She told Rhett about it that evening, and he listened and said, "Good," and went back to the fence diagram he'd been working on, and she thought, yes, good. Not dramatic, just good. The debt on the eastern land was paid off in full by the end of the second summer. Evelyn did the final accounting on a Saturday morning in September, sitting at the kitchen table with Lily on her lap, eating a piece of biscuit, with the focused dedication of a 1-year-old who has recently discovered that solid food is one of the better aspects of being alive. She ran the numbers 3 times because she always ran numbers 3 times, and they came out the same 3 times. And she wrote the final figure in the ledger with a particular satisfaction that had nothing to do with the number itself and everything to do with what the number represented. She had said it was possible. She had run the projections in March of the previous year and said, "This is what we can do," and they had done it, and here was the evidence in ink. She was thinking about this, about the strange, durable pleasure of being right about something that mattered, when Rhett came in from the morning work. He poured coffee, looked at her face, looked at the ledger. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. Second time she had said that word to him about this property. First time was on a boardwalk in March with a deed in her hand. Now it was at a kitchen table with a paid debt and a 1-year-old eating biscuit. He sat down across from her. He looked at the ledger, at the final figures she'd circled. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You know what that means," he said. "We own it," she said, "completely. Both properties. We always owned it." "We own it without owing anything for it," she corrected. "That's different." He looked at her. "It is different." He reached across the table and took her hand, briefly, the way he did things. Not elaborately, but entirely. "You said we could do it." "I calculated that we could do it." "That's not the same as saying, 'You calculated right.'" "I usually do," she said, and then laughed because it sounded more arrogant than she'd intended. And he laughed too, and Lily looked between them both with the expression of a person who is not sure what is funny, but is prepared to find it amusing anyway on general principles. What Evelyn did not say, what she held privately, the way she'd learned to hold the things that were too large for the kitchen table, was what she was actually thinking about while she ran those numbers. She was thinking about a woman on a train coming west with everything she owned in a single suitcase and a sleeping child beside her, and a plan that she had believed in the way you believe in things when you have no alternative, completely, because you have to. She was thinking about the station master and his logbook, and the specific quality of the floor dropping out from under you when everything you were heading toward simply ceases to exist. She had believed in that moment that arriving one day late had ended her. What she understood now, sitting in a warm kitchen in September with paid land and a daughter eating biscuit, and a son somewhere outside with the horses and a husband across the table who had made space for all of her, not just the useful parts, was that the late arrival had not been the tragedy. The late arrival had been the mechanism, the thing that broke the plan open and let something else come through. You could not have told her that on the station bench. She would not have believed it, and more than that, it would not have been true yet. It only became true in retrospect, in the living of what came after. That was the thing about the stories people told themselves when everything fell apart. The stories that said it happened for a reason, the ones that tried to make the pain into a portal. Those stories were not always wrong, but they were never true at the moment of impact. They became true, or didn't, depending on what you did next. Depending on whether you stayed on the bench or got up and asked May Sullivan for an apron and got to work. Evelyn had gotten up. She had gotten up because she had a 5-year-old watching her face for permission to fall apart, and she had refused to give it, And that refusal had been the first decision in a chain of decisions that had led, through work and stubbornness and an accounting ledger and a photograph on a shelf and a child's drawing tacked to a wall, to here. Here was not perfect. Here was never going to be perfect. There would be bad seasons and arguments she and Rhett had not had yet, and the ordinary ongoing difficulty of building a life with another person who was also a whole complicated person with their own silences and their own history. There was a debt cleared, but there would be other financial pressures because there always were. There was a baby who was healthy now, but the world did not guarantee this, and she had looked at Rhett's face on the night of Lily's birth and understood that neither of them would ever fully stop being afraid of that. But here was real. Here was built. Here was something she had put her hands into and shaped alongside someone who had chosen to stand beside her rather than in front of her, and it held her weight, and she trusted it, and she had not trusted anything that completely in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. It felt like arriving somewhere you didn't know you were heading until you got there. Noah came in through the back at noon with mud on his boots and something he'd found interesting in his hand, a piece of quartz with something in it that caught the light, which he presented to Lily as a gift. Lily took it with the gravity of a person receiving tribute and immediately tried to put it in her mouth, which Noah prevented with the reflexes of experience and the small negotiation of getting the rock back while offering an acceptable alternative, a wooden spoon from the kitchen, which Lily approved, played out with the practiced efficiency of a 7-year-old who had learned the particular diplomacy of a sibling's needs. Rhett watched this from the doorway. He had that look he sometimes got, the one that came and went quickly, that she thought he might not know he was making, the look of a man counting his specific mercies. She understood it because she did the same thing, just more quietly. That afternoon, after Lily was down for her nap, and Noah was at the table with Harriet Banks's primer, he was reading well now, with the voracious efficiency of a child who has discovered that books contain more information than any single adult can provide. Evelyn walked out to the south fence. The roses were still there. Clara's roses, planted in the first year of a marriage that had lasted 8 years before the fever took everything. They were past their summer bloom now, September roses, reduced to hips and late leaves, and the scraggly, slightly tired look of things that have given everything they had and are resting. She had learned to tend them through the summer from a book she'd found in the Black Ridge Lending Library, which had given her enough to go on. They had bloomed well in June, red and full, and she thought probably better than they had been in years, because someone had been paying attention to them. She put her hand on the fence rail and looked at the roses and thought about a woman she had never met and never would, who had planted these in the first year of a life she didn't know would be cut short, who had planted them because she intended to be here long enough to watch them grow. In some way, she had been right about that. Evelyn heard Rhett behind her before she heard his footsteps. She had learned to read the way the air changed around him, the particular quality of his presence. He stopped beside her at the fence and looked at the roses. "They did well this year," he said. "They did." He was quiet for a moment. Clara would have been glad someone was tending them. She looked at him. "I was looking at the roses, not at her." But his expression was open in the way it got when he was not managing himself, when he was just present in something. "I hope so," she said. "She would have liked you," he said. She had no patience for people who weren't straight about things. Evelyn looked back at the roses. She did not know what to do with the gift of that statement. It was too large to absorb all at once. She let it sit. Rhett, she said. Do you remember what you said to me when I told you I was going to leave at the end of the trial month?" He thought. "I said I didn't want you because of Caleb." "Before that." She looked at him. "You said I didn't arrive too late. You said I came exactly when you needed me." He looked at her. The afternoon light was the kind September produced when it was being its best self, long and golden, and with enough warmth left in it to feel like a gift. "I meant it," he said. "I know." She turned back to the roses. "I've thought about it many times. What it means. Arriving when you're needed, not when you plan to." She paused. "I used to think of the delay as the thing that broke my plan. Now I think it was the plan breaking that made room for something better." "Plans break," he said. "Doesn't always work out that way." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She knew that. She was not someone who believed that things worked out because they were supposed to. She believed that things worked out when people made the decision, over and over, through difficulty and fear and the ordinary grinding demands of a life that never stopped requiring something, to build them. To show up and do the accounting and ask for the apron and refuse to leave when someone with a carriage told you that you should. The decision was not made once. It was made every day. She had been making it since the morning after she arrived, when she'd gone downstairs before dawn and asked May if she needed help with the breakfast rush. She would keep making it. That was the work. Not the dramatic moments, the difficult conversation in the kitchen, the meeting with the land agent, the night of Lily's birth, but the ordinary ones. The ledger entries, the tended roses, the supper on the table, the hand on a child's shoulder when he woke from a bad dream, the accumulated ordinary weight of a life that had decided to be something. From inside the house, she heard Lily wake from her nap. Not crying, just the particular vocal announcement of a person who has finished sleeping and has views about what should happen next. Then Noah's voice, patient and instructional, explaining something to his sister through the window, and the sound of Lily's opinion on this, which was largely positive. Evelyn looked at the ranch, the land spreading east to the boundaries they had purchased, the cattle on the far pasture, the buildings her hands had shaped through 2 winters, the south fence with its roses, and she thought, I built this. Not alone, not without help and luck, and a man who had been willing to stand beside her. But she had been here. She had put her hands into it. It bore the mark of her having been present. She had arrived one day too late for the life she planned. She had arrived exactly on time for this one. Rhett put his arm around her shoulders, unhurried, completely natural, the gesture of a man entirely at home in his own life, and she leaned into him slightly, and they stood at the south fence in the September afternoon and listened to their children through the window, and the roses nodded very slightly in the wind that came down from the mountains as the afternoon turned. There was nothing tidy about how she'd gotten here. There was nothing painless about what it had cost, for both of them, to be people capable of building this. Loss had preceded it. Fear had run alongside it the whole way. There had been a woman in a carriage and a cold station master and a dead man she'd never met, and $17 folded inside a boot and a child who practiced whistling in private so he'd have something to show a man he'd already decided to love. None of that was erased by what came after. It was all still there, underneath, the way foundations are underneath houses, invisible and load-bearing. What she had learned across 2 Colorado winters and 1 hard summer and a baby born in December and a debt paid in September and every ordinary day between them was this. Grief was not the opposite of love. Loss was not the opposite of gain. Arriving too late to one thing simply meant you were arriving, possibly in time for something else. The frontier did not care about your plan. Life did not care about your plan. What it offered instead was the raw material of something, and the question was always whether you had the nerve to pick it up and start building. She had been afraid every step of the way. She had built it anyway. The wind came down from the mountains again, cooler this time, carrying the first real suggestion of the coming season. And inside the house, Lily made a sound that meant she was done waiting, and Noah's voice rose slightly in good-natured negotiation, and the afternoon was already tilting toward evening, and there was supper to start and a ledger to close and tomorrow's work to plan. Evelyn pushed herself off the fence rail. I should go in, she said. Yeah, Rhett said. He didn't move for another moment. He looked at the land the way he always did at the end of a day, assessing it, accounting for it, the look of a man who takes his stewardship seriously. Then he straightened and turned with her toward the house, and they walked back across the yard together as the light went gold and long across the Colorado ground, and behind them the roses held the last of the afternoon warmth. The way things hold warmth when they have been well tended, releasing it slowly into the cooling air, giving back what they had been given, right up until the end of the season.